Chapter 204. Because of Silen's actions, the project made great progress. This huge hemispherical machine was like a flower bud that took a small step forward. However, this small step was enough for everyone to see the general direction. To be able to become an academician of the League of Stars Research Institute, one's eyesight must be quite good. After the big machine moved, several old academicians quickly formulated the next steps based on the information collected before. The old academicians didn't have the time to stop Silen's actions just now. Although it was a significant step, the project was just too important. They had no choice but to be as cautious as they could be, and they wouldn't allow Silen to do whatever he wanted from now on. Under the guidance of several authoritative figures, each of the direct disciples had the intention of showing off their skills to gain face for their masters, trying their best to show off their most powerful side. The old academicians who were supervising the work nodded at the performance of their disciples. They all thought that their disciples were the best. Every engineering technician had their own assigned tasks. Everyone's assigned area was recorded, and there was a special monitor monitoring it not far away. Every area would be inspected again. If there was a problem, they could directly find the person in charge of that area. Even though the disciples were the ones who did the work, the main responsibility was still on the masters. This was because the masters would personally inspect the work after it was completed. The military wouldn't admit fault because their own equipment didn't detect any problems. They would still look for authoritative figures to take responsibility. This was something that Mo Hung didn't like. As the old academicians were talking, Silen slowly walked over. Mo Hung glanced at him and grinned. He tried to make himself look more serious. "It's done." Silen showed an honest smile. "It's done. Master, do you want to inspect it?" "Ahem, of course I have to inspect it. Don't cut corners by finishing it so quickly. If there's a problem, I won't forgive you." Mo Hang's words sounded harsh, but who in the room could not hear the smugness in his voice? As the first person to complete the work and Mo Hang's precious disciple, the old academicians were tired anyway. It was a good time to see what Mo Hang's disciple was capable of. Mo Hung didn't stop them. Instead, he was quite happy. He put his hands behind his back and walked over without Silen's help. The old academicians behind him curled their lips. Look at how cocky he is. When they arrived at the area that Silen was in charge of, the old academicians could tell that it was definitely the work of an extremely professional. It could be said to be perfect. Even the old academicians couldn't guarantee that they could do a better job than the interface of the parts, the connection of the wires, and the placement of the small instruments. In fact, Silen had already finished his work a long time ago. He had even studied the entire machine, but because he had only done the preliminary work, there was a limit to what he could study. After a while, he got bored and stood up to report to Mo Hung. He wondered what the other academicians would think if they knew the truth. He took the military equipment and inspected it. It was indeed of excellent quality. This time, Mo Hang's tail, which had been raised high up in the air, was about to reach the sky. Seeing that the old academicians had been silent all this time, and that he couldn't find any fault to scold, Mo Hung grinned and waved his hands. He pretended to be disgusted and said, all right. Don't think that you'll be fine just because you've completed the project. When we get back, massage this old man's legs and test your recent homework." "Recent homework? What the hell is there to do recently?" Silen rolled his eyes on the inside, but Silen was well aware of Mo Hang's desire to show off. After Mo Hung lay down on the recliner, he obediently massaged Mo Hang's legs. Aging was first manifested in one's feet and legs. Among people of the same age and gene rank, some would walk as if they were flying, while others would stagger. That was the difference. Moreover, the legs and knee joints had to bear the weight of the entire body. Over time, they would wear out and seriously affect the movement of the joints. As one grew older, the wear and tear would become more and more serious. Even someone like Mo Hung, who was once famous when he was young, had no choice but to accept his old age. His occupational disease was very obvious. His hands were fine when he worked selflessly, but the damage to his legs was more severe. His frequent menstrual cramps had also gradually shrunk. Back at Seven Lights, Sillin would massage Mo Heng's legs from time to time. Until now, Mo Heng still felt that the healthcare machine's effect was inferior to Sillin's massage. Sigh, my legs feel much more comfortable after every massage. My blood vessels are unblocked, and the soreness and weakness in my legs are greatly reduced. Mo Heng sighed. The few old academicians who had just returned to their seats pretended not to hear anything. Show off all you want. I'll pretend I didn't hear anything. It was only after Sillin massaged Mo Heng's legs for a long time that the people on the other side finally finished their work. Because of the importance of this project, many people would rather slow down in order to make every step perfect. But the old academicians had to admit that there was still a gap between their engineering quality and Sillin's, even if they did so. In truth, they had already performed very well and exceeded their usual standards. But with Sillin as a comparison, they were not as eye-catching. Although the gap was there, the overall engineering quality of this step was still excellent. Are you ready? Yes. Some on the other side made a gesture. All right, start the countdown. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Connect. Following the old academician's order, this step of the project began. The energy was connected, and the engineering areas began to come into play. The huge hemispherical shape that opened a little at the top began to change. This big flower bud bloomed into a big arc, and its appearance also changed, revealing some control surfaces that everyone was very familiar with. Everything was difficult at the beginning. The most difficult part had been completed, and the rest of the project would be easier. There was no need for these people to fully invest in it. The things to pay attention to in the early stage and some of the working principles of this big machine had been annotated, so the people inside the military should be able to handle it after taking over. Originally, someone in the military wanted Mo Heng to participate in the later stages of the project, but Mo Heng refused. This time, he did not want to get involved in the internal affairs of the military. If he caused trouble, it would also affect Mo Qing. Mo Heng had a deep understanding of the problem and was quite decisive. He would immediately cut off what needed to be cut off. After working for half a day, Mo Heng was also tired. Although he wanted to talk to Sillin for a while, for the sake of Mo Heng's health, Sillin refused and let Mo Heng rest. After being invited to this planet to do the project, Mo Heng had not had a good rest. When he was young, he could work hard, but when he was old, he could not. After Sillin repeatedly promised that he wouldn't disappear for no reason this time, Mo Heng finally showed mercy and let Sillin leave. In fact, the main reason was that Mo Heng was in a good mood today. He was in a pretty good mood. He was exhilarated and proud of himself. Even when he was sleeping, his mouth was upturned. The person that Mo Heng sent to send Sillin back was one of the two major generals. Although this person was still expressionless, at least when he looked at Sillin, his eyes were not as cold and alienated as before. They also admired Sillin's ability, so it was no wonder that Mo Heng wanted him. A person that could make those old academicians and old authorities speechless was definitely a rare person. Originally, the plan was to send Sillin to the small planet Vanguard in the satellite belt, but due to the development of the situation, he was sent to another part of the planet instead. A few hours after Sillin was brought out, the military sent out a message saying that they were going to organize a meet and greet. All the invited parties would gather at the stated location. Of course, the people attending the meet and greet were still the leaders of each party. They were allowed to bring a group of people with them, but the number of people and weapons were limited. The B squadrons of Vanguard stayed on the small planet in the satellite belt, but Somba Leruo and Bart had brought Hui Mao and Cheto with them. Sillin could go there directly. Right now, part of the teams dispatched by each party had arrived at the mentioned coordinates on the planet. As for the remaining forces of each party, they naturally had their own arrangements. No one was an idiot, and they were all prepared. They wouldn't trust the military completely, not to mention that there were some people who often clashed with each other among these invited forces. Only when they were prepared would they be able to fight. The meeting point this time was specially circled out by the military for the purpose of a meet and greet. That being said, it would be best if the space plane didn't fly into the meeting point. After all, the space plane belonged to the military. If Scylla were to walk out of the military spaceplane and return to Vanguard in front of everyone's eyes, there was no telling what kind of trouble they would cause. That was why Scylla got off the spaceplane when he was still some distance away from the meeting point. He activated his hoverboard and flew toward the meeting point. Right now, he didn't know what the leaders were doing. The meeting hadn't started yet, and he didn't see a single big shot in sight. However, the small fries that came along with him were already talking to each other. You could see people wandering around outside everywhere. Scylla's arrival didn't attract any attention. It was too common for people of Scylla's age to wander around everywhere. In this place, most of the hunters were from the four great families, but he basically didn't know anyone he met. Scylla flew along the coordinates he obtained, and when he passed by a certain place, he suddenly sensed an unusual movement behind him. He dodged a whip and adjusted his hoverboard. Then he skillfully hooked the hoverboard and stood still. The person who attacked him didn't seem to have any intention of attacking further. There was no killing intent in that attack, just now, and it was more like a greeting. That was why Scylla didn't make a move. After he quickly steadied himself, he adjusted his hoverboard and hovered in place. Then, he turned around and looked at the person who attacked him behind him. "Yo, it really is you," the person said with joy in his voice. The corner of Scylla's eyebrows rose. A familiar face. "Long time no see, who's he?" The person who attacked Scylla was none other than the crossdresser Hoosie he met in Sector S's prison. Scylla had a good impression of Hoosie. At the very least, she didn't run away alone when the passage door closed and try to pull Scylla out with a whip instead. This meant that Hoosie was a good person. Right now, Hoosie had changed her attire. She was still dressed as a man, and her mustache was curled at the sides. She stood on the hoverboard and grinned at Scylla. Looking at the area below him, Scylla asked, "You're from Fire Phoenix?" This area was assigned to the people of Sector S as a foothold, and right below, it was Fire Phoenix's territory. In Sector S, Fire Phoenix was just like Flying Snake. They were one of the most famous forces in Sector S. Last time, Scylla Halong's route wasn't in Fire Phoenix's territory, but he didn't think that this Hoosie would appear there from so far away. Moreover, he didn't appear as a prisoner or a prison guard. There was no one from Fire Phoenix in that prison. Of course, Scylla wouldn't ask about the secret entanglements between the forces in Sector S. He wouldn't get a true answer, even if he did. "Yeah, I'm from Fire Phoenix. It's fate that we meet again, and we're comrades who have gone through thick and thin together. Let me formally introduce myself. My name is Shanhua, and I'm here with Fire Phoenix to join in the fun." A pause later, Shanhua asked, "What's your name? Also, which force are you from? From the looks of it, you don't look like you'll be staying at the forces in Sector S." "My name is Scylla. I'm from Vanguard." Scylla didn't plan to hide this. "Oh, one of the Great Four, Vanguard. You're pretty famous. I didn't think you'd have such a big background. I heard that the people of the Great Four who can come here are all important people in the Great Four. I'm not really an important person. It's pure coincidence that I'm here." Shanhua didn't believe Scylla's words, but she didn't plan to dwell on this question any longer. Instead, she asked, "I'm bored right now. Do you have any fun recommendations?" "No, I'm about to report back. I don't have time. Tisk, boring." While they were talking, another person flew over from below. However, this person didn't come from Fire Phoenix's territory, but from Flying Snake's territory. Flying Snake?" Shanhua said curiously. Based on her understanding of Flying Snake CGU, this guy usually didn't pay attention to outsiders. "Scylla, long time no see," CGU said with a smile. CGU saw Scylla and Shanhua in the air when he was bored and looked around with his binoculars just now. His main reason for flying over was still Scylla. He didn't have a good chat with him last time at Sector S because there were too many things to do, and he was busy for a long time after that. He didn't have the chance to pay attention to Scylla Halong's movements, and by the time he was free, these two people were nowhere to be seen. It was rare for him to meet someone he knew here, so of course he had to come over and say hello. "Long time no see, CGU." Scylla smiled and fist-bumped the flying CGU. "You know each other?" Shanhua looked at the duo and saw the smile on CGU's face. Their relationship wasn't bad, at least better than her relationship with Scylla. They were familiar with each other. Since when did Flying Snake and Vanguard contact each other? We met each other by chance when we went to Sector S last time. Sillin said. He didn't mention anything about CGU being rescued from danger. CGU and Sillin were grateful for Sillin's explanation. After all, no one was willing to announce those things to the public, let alone a fellow big-head Phoenix Flame of Sector S. CGU looked around and asked, "Why don't I see Lung? Is he here too?" "He should be, but not in this area. I'm for Vanguard, and he's on the other side. Why don't you give me your communicator's contact number, and I'll tell you when I get in touch with him." The military had set up a special local communication network in this assembly area, and there was a special frequency coverage in the assembly area. Sure, leaving aside the fact that Sillin Helong had saved CGU's life, befriending Sillin Helong would be beneficial to CGU's own development. CGU believed in his own judgment. Shanhua also came over to exchange contact numbers. She was pretty bored here, and she heard that she would be staying here for a few more days. The meeting wouldn't end in a day. Many of his old friends hadn't come, and Shanhua was a person who couldn't stay idle. It wasn't easy for her to meet someone she knew, someone she could call an acquaintance. Adding Flying Snake, yes, and that Lung they mentioned, it shouldn't be too boring. After exchanging contact numbers, Sillin continued to fly towards Vanguard. After Sillin flew away, Shanhua followed CGU with interest. "Hey, how did you two meet? Do you want me to exchange information with you?" CGU glanced at her. "You didn't tell him that you're the disciple of the current Fire Phoenix?" "I didn't." Shanhua raised her thumb and stroked her mustache. Many people would have thoughts about her identity as the disciple of the current Fire Phoenix. It was precisely because of this that Shanhua often put on makeup and left home to roam the world. Fire Phoenix also let Shanhua's behavior be. This was also a form of growth, and it wasn't good to keep her by her side. "Is there a need?" Shanhua looked at CGU. CGU didn't reply. When Sillin arrived at Vanguard's area, he could already see the cat sitting on Somba Leruo's hat from afar. Right now, Hui Mao was scratching his paw impatiently while Bart was teasing him with his long mustache. At first, Hui Mao just shook his ears and ignored Bart's teasing. But in the face of Bart's persistent harassment, Hui Mao finally moved his paw. While Hui Mao was feeling depressed because the B squadrons couldn't come to the meeting point, Bart and Somba Leruo expressed their willingness to bring Hui Mao and Cheto to the meeting point. Hui Mao thought for a moment and decided to tag along. With Bart and Somba Leruo's guarantee, Hui Mao wasn't afraid of the military or the monstrous scientists attacking him. But when he arrived, he discovered that he didn't even know them. Just as Hui Mao was about to shave the old bastard's mustache with his sharp claws, he suddenly sensed something and looked up into the sky. When he saw Sillin, Hui Mao wanted to shout, "My savior!" He jumped down from Somba Leruo's hat and climbed up Sillin's leg before Sillin could stabilize the hoverboard. Then he crouched on Sillin's shoulder and shot Bart a "what can you do now" look. Bart simply stroked his mustache and smiled faintly without saying a word. Sillin jumped down from the hoverboard and put it away. Then, he flicked Hui Mao's head and looked at Bart and Somba Leruo to greet them. "Lil Sillin, are you done over there?" Bart asked. "It's done. The rest will be taken over by the people inside the military." Bart nodded and didn't ask any more questions. Since Bart and Somba Leruo had been moving all this time, they had already reached the edge of Vanguard Zone. Any further, and they would be entering Lon Hudy's zone. While Sillin and Bart were talking about this newly lit sector, Hui Mao suddenly let out a shout and pointed his claw in a certain direction. "Sillin, look, it's that kid called Ghost Butterfly something who owes us money." Chapter 205. Hui Mao had never had any direct contact with Guidai Shichi before. Danlong had once told Hui Mao about Lon Hudy, and under Hui Mao's strong request, he had even used a device to draw out Guidai Shichi's appearance. After serving under Sillin for so long, Hui Mao had developed a temperament that would get excited at the mention of money. He had a deep impression of the people who owed him money, so when he saw the person on the debt list, Hui Mao became excited. Because Hui Mao was too excited, his voice was a little loud, so much so that the people around him turned to look at him. Then, they looked in the direction Hui Mao's claw was pointing at. Guidai Shichi was originally chatting with his two companions about the few big-breasted girls they had met on their way here, but Hui Mao's loud shout attracted their attention. Then, Gue Dai Shichi's stomach ached when he saw the person he really didn't want to see. Why is that bastard here? Moreover, because of Hui Mao's words, everyone's gazes were focused on them. Gue Dai Shichi just wanted to find a hole to hide in. Bart looked at the constipated expression on Gue Dai Shichi's face and smiled in relief. Even Lon Hudy's people had times when they were humiliated like this. Long time no see. Sillin raised his hand in greeting. The corner of Gue Dai Shichi's mouth twitched. Long time no see. The people around Gue Dai Shichi looked at Sillin and wondered what level this person belonged to in Vanguard. Judging by age, he was either a B Squadron member or an assistant in the A Squadron. But when they looked at the two people next to him, whether it was Bart or Sombaleruo, they were both veterans. Who wouldn't know them? The person standing next to the two of them was not unfamiliar with them either. He didn't lower his stance either, so there was more to think about. Hui Mao stood on Sillin's shoulder and stared at Gue Dai Shichi with round eyes, as if saying, if you don't admit it, I'll go up and scratch you. Ha ha. So you guys are for Vanguard. I was looking for you guys for a long time, but I couldn't find you. Do you have any contact information? Gue Dai Shichi took the initiative to walk over and said. It couldn't be helped. If he waited for Sillin to take the initiative to speak, would he, Gue Dai Shichi, still have any face left? Moreover, Gue Dai Shichi had personally experienced that brat's character. He was definitely trash. Sillin and Hui Mao weren't stupid enough to believe Gue Dai Shichi's bullshit. They just smiled at Gue Dai Shichi, making Gue Dai Shichi's hair stand on end. Bart patted Sillin's shoulder and said, you guys go ahead and chat. Sombaleruo and I will go somewhere else to meet our old friends. After Bart and Sombaleruo left, Gue Dai Shichi was visibly more relaxed. After all, the two of them were from the older generation. It was a little awkward to speak in front of them. Moreover, Gue Dai Shichi was used to being casual in Lon Hudy, so he felt uncomfortable when he saw the older members of other hunter regiments. Brat, the normal stimulant elixirs and nutrition pills cost a total of 1 million, and that's not including the interest. Hui Mao said. Gue Dai Shichi glanced at Hui Mao. How did this pet know about his debt? Without thinking too much about it, Gue Dai Shichi put his hands in his trouser pockets and raised his chin. Why would Lon Hudy do something so immoral? Find a place to swipe my card, and I'll transfer the money to you. Sillin's communicator rang, just as he was about to speak. The corner of Sillin's eyes twitched when he saw the contact code displayed on the communicator. 888888. Setting aside the question of which party the A represented, Sillin knew that it was that idiot just from the 6 8s behind the contact code. Sillin looked around and found a quiet place. As expected, Lung's face that had just woken up appeared on the communicator the moment the call connected. I was just about to look for you. But how did you know my contact code? Sillin asked. Lung smiled proudly and scratched his hair that looked like a bird's nest. I got it from C.I. Jincheng. Hey, Wheeze, I have a new flavor of fish biscuits here. There are more than 10 flavors, including freshwater and saltwater fish flavors. Really? Hui Mao's dilated pupils showed his excitement. Here, look. Lung lifted up a plate in his hands. The biscuits on the plate were specially made into the shape of fish. Different flavors had different fish shapes. Sillin, let's go look for Lung. It's none of our business as long as they don't fight here. Hui Mao slapped Sillin's face with his claws and said, You guys can come over now. I have a newly built clubhouse here, and I'm planning to hold a small gathering while everyone is free. We're all familiar with each other, and I've already told C.I., Jincheng, and Knight about it. You should come as well. There are a few other familiar faces who will be coming later. Let's have a gathering. All right. Did CGU ask you to invite him? Flying Snake? He's here too? Of course I'm inviting him. Who else is there too? Who's that figure behind you? Do I know him? Lung asked when he saw the figure behind Sillin through the communicator. Sillin adjusted the angle of the communicator so that Lung could see Gue Dai Shichi more clearly. When he saw the face on the communicator, Gue Dai Shichi's mood turned sour again. This guy wasn't a good guy either. However, Just as Guidai Shichi braced himself for Lung's next words that made his stomach ache, just like the cat on Silen's shoulder, Lung took a close look at Guidai Shichi and said with certainty, "I don't know him." Guidai Shichi. This sentence didn't just make his stomach ache, even his balls hurt. Guidai Shichi never knew that his presence was this insignificant. Hui Mao's beard shook. How can you not know him? He's the one who was beaten half to death. The one who owed you money and was saved by you guys later. You even told me what he looked like back then. Guidai Shichi wanted to kill someone when he heard Hui Mao's words. Fortunately, there weren't many people here, and their voices weren't loud. Otherwise, they would be laughed at for a long time if they were overheard. After looking again, Lung finally remembered that he didn't usually have a good memory for people who didn't trade money with him. So it's that perverted butterfly. Since we've bumped into each other, let's come over together. All right, I'm not going to talk to you guys anymore. I'm hungry. I'm going to look for food. See you later, beep. Before Silen could finish, the guy cut him off. Putting away the communicator, Silen looked at Guidai Shichi. Let's go. We'll go to that rich guy. He has everything, and we can even get some food. Guidai Shichi was quite unwilling to go. He really didn't dare compliment the characters of these two people. But a rich guy? Who is he? Guidai Shichi asked. Silen looked at Guidai Shichi in surprise. You don't know who he is? That guy's appearance rate in the media is quite high. Guidai Shichi was conflicted. He had been busy and didn't have time to pay attention to that. And after a simple check on Silen, he didn't check again. He was really busy at that time. Seeing Guidai Shichi's conflicted look, Silen said, his name is Andrira Lung. F***. It turned out to be that poor family that only had money left. No matter what, he had to go get some food. Let's go. Guidai Shichi said angrily. Wait, I'll call someone else. Silen contacted CGU, but Pianhua kept an eye on CGU. So when CGU made a move, she followed. They arranged to meet at the border between Vanguard and Lon Hudi. After all, CGU and the others weren't part of the hunter group, so they couldn't enter any of the areas, so they could only meet at the border. When they arrived at the place that Lung mentioned, they all had the same lament. What a wastrel! The place where Lung and the Andrira family were located was surrounded by the more famous families and business groups in the League of Stars, so this area was the kind that blinded the eyes. But the Andrira family was especially eye-catching. The temporary entertainment area that Lung mentioned was comparable to a high-class hotel. There were servants waiting in front of the door, but other than these servants, there was also a familiar skinny figure walking out from inside, obviously coming for Silen. The person who came was Brizette. There were a few youngsters talking in the private room above, and Lung felt that it wasn't good for them to talk freely with Brizette around. So he kicked Brizette out and told him to wait for Silen at the door. Brizette brought Silen and the others to the floor where Lung and the others were. The little old man's every movement was still very gentlemanly, and he also had a very kind smile on his face, but CGU and Guidai Shichi were all tensed up. They could feel that this little old man was very strong, and not someone they could deal with. Even if Brizette didn't show any evil intentions, CGU and Guidai Shichi just couldn't let their guard down. This was a habit that had been cultivated for a long time. Suddenly coming to a new environment and seeing strangers who would let down their guards so easily. Brizette didn't mind, and was still as kind as if he was looking at a descendant of his own bloodline. Brizette brought Silen and the others to a door and politely made an inviting gesture with his hand. The young master is inside. Sigh. It's better for an old man like me to not attend a gathering of youngsters. I'll only be despised if I do. Seriously, every generation of Andrira's successors had the same bad temper. Right now, he was already looking forward to the next direct descendant of Andrira, or Lung's descendant. It was much more interesting to be led by a little kid. Thank you. Silen returned to salute. He was still rather respectful towards the little old man Brizette. When he pushed open the door, a few people were already seated around the prepared chairs inside. Most of them were familiar faces, but there were two he didn't know. Long Knight, C.I. Jinsheng, Pride, Teresa, and Yu Ling Long, who was sitting in a special wheelchair. When he saw Silen come in, Lung stood up and waved. Hurry up, Silen. I've been waiting for you for a long time. Hey, Flying Snake, I didn't expect someone from Sector S to come as well. Please take a seat, everyone. It could be said that the people sitting here right now were all reputable figures of their generation. They were all people who held real power in their respective forces, so even if they usually carried an air of arrogance around them, they had to put away for now. Pride had matured quite a bit after so many years. Although his eyes still carried a habitual air of arrogance, it was already a lot better than before. Originally, Pride was busy with other missions and couldn't come to Sector Z. But after Ji Feihong told him about Silen's situation, and after he confirmed it with Knight, he set aside his mission and came here. Oomph. Pride still gave that trademark snort, but there was no hint of contempt in it. Silen didn't mind. After getting familiar with him, he knew that this kid was actually just this awkward. When he was embarrassed, when he didn't know what to say, he would just give a humph. Everyone knew it, but they didn't point it out. Yu Linglong returned a sweet smile to Silen. She was still about the same as the little girl he remembered from back then. No one sat on the seat next to Yu Linglong, and no one dared to. Everyone knew who this seat belonged to. CGU and Guidai Sichi very perceptibly snatched the two seats next to Yu Linglong. Pai Hua swept his gaze across the group, once before sitting next at CGU. He didn't squeeze into the seat next to Yu Linglong, and just stared at them curiously. Silen sat down next to Yu Linglong and looked at her feet. Her feet were wrapped in rehabilitation equipment that was obviously the same as Dias's after undergoing the differentiation therapy. What happened? Silen asked. It was an accident. It broke. Yu Linglong answered in a low voice. Her tone was obviously filled with great grievance. Lung, Knight, and the rest immediately shuddered. Little Princess Yu, where's that overbearing aura you had 2 minutes ago? Silen sighed on the inside. After learning of Yu Linglong's identity, he also understood that everything that happened around her was not simple. There was obviously a very complicated reason why her feet were broken. Since Yu Linglong didn't want to talk about it, he didn't ask anymore. How are you recovering now? It's all right. I can barely walk, but I can't run. It hurts a lot. She was still feeling wronged. Lung, Knight, and the rest turned their heads sideways and looked at the ground, pretending to know nothing. Little Princess Yu, you're lying. I saw you kicking an apple falling from a tree to pieces just 2 days ago. Why didn't you say it hurt then? Teresa, who had been watching all this time, pursed her lips and smiled. She raised the wine glass in her hand and gestured, long time no see, Silen. Teresa looked about the same as before. Time had not affected the beauty of Seven Lights' famous beauty Sa, but Silen knew that Teresa was no longer the Gallo Teresa of the past. Teresa Duance, Aflon Duance's eldest daughter. This was Teresa's true identity. Back then, Silen had already discovered the genetic relationship between Teresa and Aflon. Long time no see, Beauty Sa is still the same. But you've changed. You're not as handsome as before. Teresa teased. Ahem. Under Yu Linglong's coercion, Lung snapped his fingers, and a big plate of fish biscuits was served. Wow. Huimao jumped onto the big plate and rolled around, smearing all the fish biscuits with his scent. How do you feel about this present? Lung picked up a fish biscuit and tossed it toward Huimao. Huimao caught it with his mouth, chewed twice, and swallowed it. It tastes pretty good. I'm going to pack it up and bring it back later. Sure, I'll have someone deliver it to you. Wheeze moved the plate of fish biscuits to the side and ate happily on its own. It ignored Silen and Wheeze completely. The group of people gathered together, and as the host, Lung gave everyone a formal introduction. He only introduced them by name and a few simple things. Today's dinner did not involve any secrets, and it was just a gathering of peers. Among the people Silen did not recognize, there were 2 people who were similar to Alan Sheb back in the day. However, according to Lung's introduction, the electronic publications behind them were much higher ranked than the Allen families. Both of them had more than 80 contribution points. Punius was backed by a famous internet information magnate with more than 80 contribution points in the League of Stars. Back when Silen was still at Seven Lights, he had once reported on the Sector Championships Limitless. He was somewhat related to Lung. Funyuzwa was also backed by a famous business-related media magnate with more than 80 contribution points in the League of Stars, Lux. Since he mainly reported on the business sector, he had a lot of contact with Lung. If the two media giants Limitless and Lux could reach their current level, then the children they taught wouldn't be bad. At the very least, they wouldn't be muddle-headed when it came to judging and handling people. Therefore, even though they were facing people like Sillin who weren't exactly famous in the upper circle, the two of them would not look down on them. Plus, Lung, Knight, C.I. Jincheng, Yuling Long, and many more people value them. Why should they look down on them? If they didn't even have this little bit of foresight, then what the hell were they supposed to do? The two young masters of the media giants were also very interested in the trio who came with Sillin. Pianhua saw that everyone had stated their background, and after a moment of thought, he revealed his identity as Fire Phoenix's disciple. Flying Snake had no intention of hiding his identity either. Punius and Funyuzwa were obviously more curious about Sector S. After all, the League of Stars' media had the least involvement other than Sector Z. Now that Sector Z was half open to the public, only Sector S was left. After that, the four of them had a very congenial conversation. Lung had said that today was just a small gathering. They would not talk about business and only talk about entertainment. Without the interference of their elders, everyone was chatting happily. They talked and laughed at each other's embarrassing moments. At the very least, the atmosphere was pretty good. No one bothered to find out how many complicated things you had behind you, or how many shameful criminal records you had. In reality, everyone would probably find out who had a criminal record not long after this gathering. They might not be able to investigate detailed secrets with their abilities, but they definitely had the ability to gather some general information and rumors. After all, this was a large military area, so they didn't dare to play too wildly. They just ate, drank, and laughed to relax everyone. At the same time, they also felt at ease. This could be considered group. After all, it was far too easy for a lone force to become cannon fodder in this chaotic situation. No matter how high you stood, there was always a chance that you would fall. Also, judging from the current situation, if you fell, you wouldn't be able to climb the mountain again. Everyone had eaten their fill during the meal, and the worries in their hearts had eased a little. They drank a little too much, so Lung sent people to send them back. Pianhua was having a great drinking contest with a group of men, and she had even knocked out the two young masters of the media giants. They had even started calling each other bro and bro. Sillin didn't know if Punius and Funyuzwa had seen through Pianhua's disguise, but it sounded like they were calling each other bro pretty smoothly. Pianhua herself was a little drunk. Luckily, they were the only ones who knew that Pianhua was a woman. If everyone else knew, then they would have lost a lot of face. CGU had already predicted Fire Phoenix's fury, so it was best to avoid Pianhua for the next few days. Yu Linglong sat on her wheelchair with her head slightly bowed. She did not ask anyone to pick her up, and instead said to Sillin, "Send me off." Okay. Sillin did not plan to ask Lung to send someone off just now. Since he had decided to send Yu Linglong off, then he asked Lung to send Hui Mao back. This guy had to supervise the fish biscuits anyway. They didn't use a flying car. Yu Linglong's area wasn't too far from here, and she didn't want to take a flying car. So she asked Sillin to push her around. Night had already fallen in this area, and at the same time, the temperature difference between day and night was relatively large. Unlike the terrain of the hunter group, the natural scenery here was much better. After walking a few steps, they could see a small stream. Sillin could feel the vitality of the stream. Under the rocky ground, there were living creatures swimming back and forth in the stream. Not far away, there was a stone bridge that looked very ancient, but Yu Linglong suggested walking over it. The stream wasn't deep, not even reaching their knees, so they didn't have to worry about drowning. Your foot is still in the treatment period, so you can't touch the stream. Sillin said, "It's fine, the treatment device on my foot is waterproof." Saying that, Yu Linglong stood up and pressed a button on her wheelchair. The original wheelchair automatically folded up and floated 1 meter away from Yu Linglong. She was a little stiff from sitting for too long today, so she stood up and held on to Sillin's arm as they slowly walked forward. The area of the rich was very particular. Although the security system here was very good, it still maintained the natural appearance to a large extent, and there were even some sounds of insects. The two didn't say anything, and when they reached the edge of the water, Silin stopped. He slowly knelt down and pulled Yu Linglong's skirt that was almost hanging to the ground up to her knees and tied a knot. This way, the skirt wouldn't touch the water, and it could also protect her knees. The night was relatively cold, and the stream was even colder. It was important to take good care of the joints of a recovering patient. Yu Linglong felt very hot on her face, and 2 patches of red faintly spread out. However, the twilight covered her blush very well, but her current mood could be seen from her bright and gentle smiling eyes. Yu Linglong lowered her head and looked at Silin's movements. Because of her identity, Yu Linglong had always looked down on others with a strong aura, displaying the unique pride of the little princess of the Yu family. However, from this angle, her mood and performance were completely different. "Are you cold?" Silin raised his head and asked after tying the knot on Yu Linglong's long skirt. Hearing Silin's question, Yu Linglong was slightly stunned and then lightly shook her head. A slight smile appeared on her face, as though she was still an inexperienced little girl and not the little princess of the Yu family that made Long and the others go crazy from time to time. Silin also rolled up his trousers, threw his shoes over the side of the stream, and slowly led Yu Linglong into the stream. Silin first walked in the stream, and then helped Yu Linglong into the water. The cool stream water cooled down the heat caused by the alcohol, and they could feel the fish in the stream pecking at their feet. However, the night on this planet was really cold. Silin tested the temperature. It was only about 5 to 6 degrees Celsius. Even if Yu Linglong was wearing a waterproof treatment device, it would still have some effect. Silin let Yu Linglong help him walk about a meter into the stream, and when they were about 10 meters away from the other side, he stopped again. Silin bent down and said, "All right, now that you've tasted the freshness, come on up. I'll carry you. The stream is cold, and it won't be good for your recovery if you catch a cold." "Okay," Yu Linglong replied obediently. If someone who was familiar with Yu Linglong saw the usually domineering Yu Linglong being so obedient, their eyes would definitely pop out of their sockets. Yu Linglong leaned on Silin's back, and her head rested on Silin's shoulder. Listening to their breathing and the chirping of the surrounding insects, she felt an inexplicable sense of peace. Silin carried Yu Linglong on his back and walked to the other side of the stream. Yu Linglong touched the string around Silin's neck and asked, "What are you wearing?" "A person," Silin replied. Yu Linglong's hands stopped moving, and she didn't ask anymore. There was no point in arguing about the living and the dead. Yu Linglong understood, so she didn't argue about it. However, she tightened her grip on Silin's neck. They quickly covered the distance of 10 meters. "All right, little princess, come down." Yu Linglong pouted and reluctantly got down. The folded wheelchair floated down and unfolded. Silin helped Yu Linglong sit on it and used his sleeve to wipe the water off her legs. He loosened the knotted skirt to cover her legs and adjusted the thermal insulation on the wheelchair. Silin pushed the wheelchair towards the place Yu Linglong mentioned. When they approached the area, there was a group of people waiting there, but none of them came forward. Obviously, they knew little princess used temperament very well. Silin pushed the wheelchair all the way to that side and handed it to the person who took over. However, Yu Linglong turned the wheelchair around and looked at Silin quietly. She didn't say a word, but her eyes were obviously waiting for something. Silin sighed and said, "Give me your hand." Yu Linglong's eyes curved into 2 crescent moons, and she quickly extended her hand. Silin placed a large green pearl on Yu Linglong's hand. Under the twilight, it emitted a gentle green light, and it made people feel that it was full of vitality. Yu Linglong could feel the warmth emitted from the green pearl and the vitality transmitted to her palm. Even her breathing became much smoother. Of course, she knew that this thing was very precious. At least, with her status as the little princess of the Yu family, she had never seen such a special pearl until now. "This is for you. It's good for your body's recovery." "Thank you," Yu Linglong said, holding the green pearl in her hand happily. I should be the one saying thank you. Sillin didn't know what Yu Linglong saw in him, but during the days when Sillin was in the 6th Division, Yu Linglong had helped him a lot, both openly and secretly, some of which Sillin didn't even know. Looking at Yu Linglong's childlike expression, Sillin stretched out his hand and rubbed Yu Linglong's head like how he rubbed Tang Qiuqiu. The group of people behind Yu Linglong were so shocked that their jaws dropped. Their dog eyes were really blind. He actually rubbed the little princess's head. The worst thing was that the little princess actually had a shy expression. Go back and rest early. Okay. After saying goodbye, Sillin walked back, but he didn't use his hoverboard to fly away. This area was currently forbidden for outsiders to fly in the air, and the moment he flew up, he would probably become a sieve for the guards and robots of the various families hidden in the dark. After walking until he couldn't see the people of the Yu family, Sillin raised his head to look at the sky and then gave a middle finger. Somewhere high up in the sky, a small round ball was floating there. On the other side of the small round ball was a room in Lung's leisure house. Lung, Knight, and C.I. Jinsheng were huddled there staring at the screen. When they saw the big middle finger on the screen, the 3 colleagues shouted, "Fuck! How'd this guy find out?" Lung was conflicted. Perverted senses. Knight said. C.I. Jinsheng didn't say anything. He was wondering where on earth the problem was. This surveillance device was floating high up in the sky where it was hard to see with the naked eye, and it was nighttime right now. How on earth did Sillin discover it? Sillin didn't know about the 3 fellows' conflict, but he knew that they wouldn't stay put the moment he pushed Yu Linglong out. Lung's side wasn't the only one monitoring him. However, the other parties weren't doing too well, and they were constantly being disrupted by unknown signals. It was Cheto's doing. Sillin arrived at the border of several forces. It was the neutral zone, and a lot of people were flying along it. Even though it was very late right now, there were still a lot of hoverboards, flying cars, and so on. Sillin shot a glance in the direction of the little stream he passed by with Yu Linglong on his back. Then, he activated his hoverboard, jumped onto it, and flew towards the vanguard's area. Sometime after Sillin's departure, the number of people in this area gradually decreased. There was only 1 person flying in the neutral zone every 10 or so minutes. After a flying car whizzed past, everything became quiet again. The only sound one could hear was the chirping of insects. Meanwhile, a human figure gradually rose from the surface of the little stream Sillin and Yu Linglong passed by. Its face couldn't be seen clearly, and it looked like it was made entirely out of water. The figure stopped rising after its torso was exposed. The water person looked at the neutral zone and said, "Did that little guy discover me?" "I think so." The voice that answered the water person came from the forest not far away, but there was no one in sight. A gust of wind blew past, and a leaf drifted down. However, it was blocked by an invisible object on its way down, and it made a turn before landing somewhere else. "Forget it. Who cares? Our target can't be him anyway," the water person said. "Why can't it be him? Don't underestimate that brat. On the contrary, that brat has the item." "Really? That brat doesn't seem to be very powerful. He's still a little lacking in power, but he was able to discover your existence, so he must have hidden himself quite well. Let's not touch him for now and observe the situation first." "All right." The water person dove back into the water, and everything returned to normal. The flying cars that occasionally passed by the neutral zone had no idea that there were 2 people here. By the time Sillin returned to the Vanguard's territory, it was already quite late. Apart from the people on shift duty, most of the others were already resting, so Sillin walked into his room without alerting anyone. As soon as he entered the room, he was greeted by the smell of fish. There was a big box full of fish biscuits in the room. Judging from the situation, Hui Mao's storage cabinet couldn't fit all the fish biscuits in there. Among the fish biscuits, there was a cat with the tip of its ears sticking out. It moved a little when Sillin walked in, but nothing else happened after that. Sillin shook his head and let the cat go for now. Standing at the corner, Cheto opened his eyes and closed them again when he saw that Sillin had no intention of talking to him. After washing up, Sillin lay down on the bed and thought about what happened today. The gathering at Sloane's place was a small matter. The first thing that puzzled him was Yu Linglong's injuries. When he was carrying Yu Linglong on his back, he clearly noticed that there was something wrong with her breathing system and heartbeat. Yu Linglong's emotions were part of the reason, but the main reason was that her internal organs had been seriously injured. Her breathing looked normal at first glance, but Yu Linglong's internal organs were seriously damaged. Who could have hurt her like that when she was under the protection of so many people in the Yu family? Her internal organs were seriously damaged, and her legs were broken. It wasn't hard to imagine that Yu Linglong had a brush with death. Sillin could see that Yu Linglong's injury was related to the Yu family, but the second thing that puzzled Sillin wasn't as simple as it seemed. When Sillin walked into the stream, he sensed something unusual in the water, but he didn't sense any danger. Moreover, there were a lot of Yu family guards hiding in the dark at the time, and they would have come out at the first sign of trouble. That was why Sillin pretended not to notice anything and walked across the stream with Yu Linglong on his back. But when he came back, he noticed an unusual presence in the forest, even though he was walking on the stone bridge. The other party hid themselves very well, and Sillin wouldn't have noticed them if he hadn't met them before. The man who once appeared in the prison, Azrael, his men, had arrived here without anyone knowing. So, what was their purpose this time? At the very least, Sillin hadn't sensed any large-scale, strange phenomenon until now. But did the military know about the arrival of Azrael? No matter what, Sillin had to be vigilant. Azrael, his men were all crazy, and no one knew what they were thinking. Early the next morning, Carrie and the others who knew that Sillin would return late came to look for Sillin, and wanted this vice-captain to tell them about his romantic encounter. To reach Sillin's room, they had to pass through a hall in the middle of this floor, but Carrie swallowed his clamor the moment he arrived at the hall. Nah, Senior Nada. Nada sat on the sofa in the hall, reading a paper book in his hand, and beside him was a box. Towards Carrie and the others' clamor, he just smiled and said, "You're in good spirits." Carrie, Xiao Shang, and the others scratched their heads with a smile, not knowing how to react. Nada was definitely here to look for Sillin. Carrie and the others stood there awkwardly for a while before leaving. Facing such a senior, it was really nerve-wracking. Not everyone could be as calm as Sillin. When Sillin woke up, Nada had already flipped more than 10 pages of the book. "I'm really sorry, Senior Nada. Why didn't you ask them to wake me up?" "It's okay, you're tired too." Sillin walked over and took out a bottle of water and some jerky from the storage cabinet. When he passed it to Nada, Nada waved his hand. "You can eat. I've already eaten." Sillin didn't hesitate and started eating in front of Nada. "What brings you here?" Sillin asked while chewing on the jerky. The rule of not talking when eating or sleeping didn't apply to hunters. Hunters didn't have time to follow those time-wasting etiquette. Nada closed the book and pushed the box in front of Sillin. "These are some parasite samples collected by some of my friends over the years. You can take a look if you're interested." Sillin clapped his hands, wiped his fingers clean, and carefully opened the box. There were some sealed samples in the box. The bigger parasites only had some images, and the samples were only a part of their body. As for the smaller parasites, there were whole ones in half of them. They had different shapes. Some were ferocious, some were normal. There are some related records of these parasites in the video. It's definitely not as good as the professional records. It's just a rough record. Just make do with it. Sillin closed the box and smiled. "This is enough. They're very precious samples." Nada nodded. "Some of them are very special. There are also some that I couldn't get samples of, only some images. I took a look and there are a few that are really rare. If I have a chance, I might as well catch one." Sillin didn't look at the images. After finishing his breakfast, he brought the box to his room and put it away. "Do you have any plans for the morning? If you don't have any plans, accompany this old man for a walk." Nada said, "I don't have any plans. Please wait a moment." Sillin changed his clothes and brought some essentials with him. Then he walked out with Nada. "I heard that you went to Andryra's boy yesterday, and Lon Hudy's men?" Sillin didn't deny it. Many people knew about this. It's a good thing. Whether it's Andryra's, Lon Hudy's, or the people of Sector S, it's a good thing to get to know them. I know that you have a wide network of contacts, and these are all good for your future development. It may not be beneficial to use the old standards, but given the current situation, I believe you can analyze it even if you don't know much. Right now, it's not as stable as it used to be. Although Sillin didn't agree with some of Nada's views, Nada was teaching him sincerely. Sillin just listened attentively. Nada continued. Yesterday, a few old fellows in the A Squadron had a small meeting. Although the leaders' meeting hadn't started yet, everyone had analyzed some things according to the information we received. Other than the military's absolute control of Sector Z, the rest of the places will be divided. The military doesn't have a stomach big enough to swallow up this big sector in one go. Hunter groups and alike will have at least 10 years of occupation rights. As for the development and collection of resources on each planet, whether or not they can take over the areas they have been allocated will depend on their own abilities. Will there be a lot of competition? Sillin asked. Competition, that's for sure. I'm guessing that the leaders will draw randomly when the time comes, and those who get more resources will naturally be eyed by those with less resources. Therefore, your B Squadron's free missions will be canceled. When the time comes, you'll have to stay in your assigned area for a longer period of time and deal with the traps in the dark. You must be prepared for all of this. Amen, I know. This was the benefit of being a big force. Once there was a cake, the big forces in the League of Stars were divided up cleanly. The small forces couldn't even eat the dregs. While Nada was explaining some things to pay attention to, his intention was to let Sillin be mentally prepared. He didn't tell these things directly to Shotten, but to Sillin instead. It was obvious how much Nada valued Sillin. In Nada's eyes, Sillin was far more important than Shotten. Both his strength and connections satisfied Nada very much. As the duo walked, they approached the neutral zone. There was a flying car waiting for Nada. Never mind, we'll stop here. I still have some matters to attend to. You go to your own thing. After watching Nada enter the flying car and leave, Sillin also turned around and prepared to go back. It was at this moment a few people on hoverboards flew over and laughed loudly. Hearing the laughter, Sillin turned around abruptly. There were only a few backs left in the air. They looked very ordinary, just like the young people he saw when he first came to this area. The laughter of the people on the hoverboards disappeared in an instant, but it triggered a memory buried deep in Sillin's mind. It was one of the two voices that had been troubling him all this time. Fogger Wusha. Chapter 206. It was the two voices that Sillin had memorized deeply after the hypnosis effect was broken. One of the voices had hypnotized Sillin. Although he didn't know which side Mist or Wusha belonged to, it seemed that the person who had hypnotized Sillin wasn't this person. Sillin could tell that the voice hadn't interfered with his consciousness, which meant that the person who had hypnotized him was someone else. Be it Mist or Wusha, they were flying around the neutral zone openly on hoverboards without anyone noticing them. It was truly dangerous. After all, they were two top assassin organizations. This was the military's territory, and all the satellite surveillance was in the military's hands. Right now, Sillin didn't dare let Cheto invade this place. There were too many experts here, and both he and Cheto would be done for if they were caught. After cleaning up his thoughts, Sillin flew back to the base. There were some things he needed to explain as soon as possible. Just like Nada said, a portion of people had arrived as the day of the leaders' summit drew closer and closer. Carrie and the others were the first batch of Vanguard's follow-up forces, and the second batch would come to replace the first batch. However, every B Squadron would send a portion of their people instead of all of them. Then, they would take shifts so that everyone could see the planet and familiarize themselves with the environment and terrain. After Carrie and Xiaoshang's shift, the 7th B Squadron took over. Carrie and the others had to return to the small planet in the satellite belt. Unlike Sillin and the A Squadron, they couldn't stay here forever. However, Cheto didn't leave. He stayed inside Sillin's room and kept an eye on things without anyone noticing. Before Carrie and the others left, Sillin had a talk with them and told them to train as soon as possible. Lieutenant, is there work to do? Carrie rubbed his palms together. It's always good to be prepared. Sillin didn't say it out loud, but it was enough. All right, don't worry. I'll pass on the lieutenant's message. Even that white fatty will be watching closely. Tell the others to pay more attention. In reality, Scylla knew that the situation was even more complicated and serious than Nada had made it out to be. It would be fine if it was just a fight for resources, but what if it was about Olillo? 50 years ago, it was just one incident that involved several parties. Now, they were all gathered here. Once Olillo's senses discovered them, even if they didn't start fighting now, the war that would erupt after they left this planet was not something that could be compared to 50 years ago. After Scylla and the others had left, Scylla couldn't help but feel a little irritated. He didn't know if it was because of the voice he heard earlier or something else, but he just couldn't calm down. He was planning to study the parasite samples Nada had given him, but he wasn't in a good state right now. He didn't have the mood to study the samples at all and just stared blankly at them. In the end, Scylla went around on his hoverboard alone. At the meeting area the military had circled out, there were small automated service points built at intervals. These places provided food, some basic necessities, and some small entertainment. Some young people from different forces would drag old friends they hadn't seen for many years to these places. Therefore, there were a lot of people at every service point. Scylla bought a glass of fruit juice from a small beverage shop. He didn't order alcohol. His mind was already muddled and irritated to begin with, and drinking would only make him even more muddled. Right now, he needed to calm down and think about things. The surroundings were very noisy, but there were still some empty seats around this beverage shop. They were all open air. Scylla sat down in front of a small table for two and drank fruit juice under an umbrella that blocked out the light. He watched the people coming and going. The young people were in groups of 3 to 5, with the symbols of different forces. They were jostling and joking. Scylla also saw a 13 or 14-year-old girl with a butterfly tattoo on her arm. Different from Guidai Shichi's ghost butterfly tattoo, the butterfly tattoo on her arm was a swallowtail butterfly, and the pattern on the swallowtail butterfly's wings was like that of tiger. Scylla heard her companions call her Tiger Phoenix. Lon Hudi's swallowtail butterfly was her subordinate. Ching Feng handed the juice to Tiger Phoenix. Noticing Scylla's gaze, she looked back at him, then withdrew her gaze and left with Tiger Phoenix. After Lon Hudi's two subordinates left, Scylla looked around again. The cold temperature of the juice didn't calm Scylla down. It was not because of the noise around, but because he had a feeling that something was going to happen. Scylla's fingers were tapping on the juice glass unconsciously. Suddenly, his movement stopped, and all the hair on his body almost stood out. Scylla saw a person who looked very ordinary, and his appearance and clothes were not eye-catching. However, it was this person who made Scylla feel that he was surrounded by icicles, and if he moved a little bit, he would be pierced into pieces. Yes, this was the reason for his irritation. After the shock, the irritation in Scylla's heart subsided. That person just walked over step by step. There was nothing special about him. His steps were not big, and he was neither fast nor slow. Through that pair of pupils, Scylla couldn't see the hidden emotions in them at all. At first glance, he seemed to be smiling casually, but when he looked carefully, he found that he couldn't see anything. Scylla knew too well what such eyes meant. It was either a killer or a person who was so cold that he was almost cruel and numb. The others who weren't stared at by that person didn't have any abnormal reactions. They were still drinking and chatting, and they didn't know that there was such a killer approaching step by step. Only when they met that person's eyes would they understand the uniqueness and horror of this person. Now, Scylla felt like he was in a world of ice and snow. His whole body was cold, and he stood there motionlessly. His whole body was tense, and he was ready to fight at any time. Although Scylla knew that his death rate in this fight was more than 70%, he had no way out when facing this person. Scylla was even careful with every breath, and he always kept his state at the peak. However, under the gaze of this person, Scylla was quite clear about the disparity in strength between the two sides. There were weapons hidden in Scylla's leaf-patterned ring, including guns and cannons. However, against such a person, he would be killed before he could take out the weapons. Therefore, Scylla still put more attention on this person, and at the same time, his mind quickly turned to think of a way out. The strange thing was that when the person walked 5 meters in front of Scylla, he suddenly stopped. The look in his eyes seemed to be a little surprised, and then he smiled at Scylla. That smile made Scylla feel even colder, but the good thing was that the person's line of sight turned away and walked in another direction. It wasn't until the figure was submerged in the crowd for a long time that Scylla slowly let his tense muscles relax, and his back was full of cold sweat. The mouthful of juice was really cold. "Do you know who he is?" The sudden voice shocked Scylla. After he reacted, he looked behind him. He really didn't feel anyone behind him, but perhaps it was because of this person behind that the person didn't make a move. Just now, Scylla was sure that the person's target was him, and he only changed his mind later. "Hunting knife Gaydar? You're also invited to the summit?" Scylla asked. The person standing behind Scylla was indeed hunting knife Gaydar, and he still looked like a harmless academic. Gaydar sat opposite Scylla with a glass of juice and smiled. "Yeah, but I'm not like you Vanguard people. I'm a Lone Ranger after all, and the only reason they invited me here was to sign a treaty and set their minds at ease. I don't have the right to divide the area or anything, but I will get a sum of contract money." After thinking for a moment, Scylla understood the meaning behind it. After he thought it through, the problem returned to its original track. Who was that person just now? That person! Gaydar swirled the juice in his glass. "Back then, he beat me half to death, and it took me more than a dozen years to recover." Scylla nearly spat out the juice in his mouth. It turned out that Gaydar was squatting in Sector S's prison after he was injured, but it was a good place to recuperate. At the very least, it was well hidden. However, someone who could injure hunting knife Gaydar. Scylla's eyes widened, and his fingers made a 6 and then a 1. Yes, he is one of the 6 stars lone hunters. As expected of that level. Among the 6 stars of hunt, other than the 4 from the Big 4, you know of 2 lone hunters, right? Scylla nodded, but I don't know who they are. It was true that with Scylla's current identity and level, he could not meet the people who stood at the top yet. But what was up with that person just now? Scylla did not think that he had offended him. One of the 2 lone hunters is all right. She's the only female among the 6 stars of hunt, Xian Prisa. She has a lazy personality and does things according to her own preferences, but at least she's not bloodthirsty. Strictly speaking, she's not a lone hunter. Scylla raised an eyebrow. He really did not expect there to be a woman among the 6 stars of hunt. As for the other person, that's the one you met just now. Osculo. That guy kills as easily as he eats. He is known as the loneliest and most vicious lone hunter. The people he knows have all killed their way to the top, and he only recognizes them if they can survive his attacks. As for the people he has decided to kill, other than a few star hunters and a few from the Heavenly Edict Empire, no one is still alive. It was just a spur of the moment. He hasn't made up his mind to kill you yet. However, Gaydar looked at Scylla. "I'm not trying to discourage you, but based on what I know about Osculo, he definitely has his eyes on you." Scylla caught the other meaning in Gaydar's words. "Just eyes on me? He doesn't want to kill me?" "That depends on what he has on you that is worth his attention. He is a person who will not make a move without direct benefits. Of course, that doesn't rule out the possibility that he might kill on a whim for fun." Olilo's star map fragment. However, he didn't feel the attraction from Olilo's star map just now. Gaydar could tell what Scylla was thinking. He said, "There's no need to doubt it. It's exactly what you're thinking. Some people have the means to hide the attraction and resonance." Scylla frowned. In other words, the people who were targeted were those who did not have the ability to hide the attraction and resonance, and he was one of them. "Do you want to know how to hide them?" Gaydar asked with a faint smile. Scylla looked at Gaydar. This lone traveler's smile was sly no matter how he looked at it. "Senior, if you have any requests, just tell me. I like to talk to smart people." Gaydar finished the juice in the glass, but he still held the empty glass in his hand and played with it. "I can tell you how to hide it, and I can also give you a piece of Olilo's star map fragment. Of course, this fragment is not the type you want, but it is the type that the Andryra family needs." Scylla lowered his eyes and did not say anything, quietly waiting for Gaydar to continue. Seeing that Scylla did not respond, Gaydar continued. "The conditions are actually not much. When the time comes, after you collect the Olilo's star map and activate Olilo, I want to accompany you. Of course, I promise I won't delay your matters, and I might even be able to help you." Senior Gaydar, let's not talk about whether I can get it or not. How do you know what kind of fragment I have? Out of the 5 Alillos, only 2 are known. Excluding the one from the Andryra family, I don't know what the remaining 2 are. I know what kind of fragment you have, and the people looking for it are not people you can resist. Azrael and Osculo are both waiting for the one you have. Scylla was shocked. There was actually an Azrael. However, from what Gaydar said, he did not know that he actually had 2 pieces. What's this in my hand? Serene asked. In the myth of creation, the one that represents new life is called a shortcut. Shortcut. I once heard a guy from Azrael say that the shortcut might be a space jump point, a jump point to a jump point outside of the star system where the League of Stars is located. This news undoubtedly shocked Scylla. Due to the abnormal environment around the star system where the League of Stars was located, the League of Stars Research Institute had tried some space technology, but to no avail. That was why no one from outside the star system had ever entered the star system of the League of Stars, and no one from the League of Stars had ever gone out. Even the people from the Big Four could only go out a little around the star system, but could not completely escape. If this news were to be known by the military, even Knight and M.O. Hung would not be able to protect Scylla. But was he going to hand it over to the people from Vanguard now? I advise you to keep it for yourself. Vanguard isn't as united as a piece of iron. Unless Ji Feng personally promises it, don't take it out easily. If Scylla agreed with Gaydar, then the best time was to wait for him to join the A-Team. But before he joined the A-Team, then how can I guarantee that I won't be killed by Azrael and Osculo, the Star Hunter? Don't worry about the people from Azrael. Their main goal right now isn't to get the shard, but to find it. The most important thing for you right now is to escape Osculo's knife. Easy for you to say. How am I supposed to escape? Run to Ji Feng's place? If you run to Ji Feng's place now, it'll undoubtedly be a direct confrontation between Ji Feng and Osculo. With the current situation, more than half of the people in Vanguard will die. Scylla fell silent. Don't worry, I've already divined for you. There will be ups and downs, but you won't die in the end. Scylla was so angry that he laughed. I didn't know that Senior Gaydar believed in this. Gaydar simply said, some things have to be believed. Some things have to be believed. Scylla thinks of Tico's rabbit. All right, I'll tell you the method now. As for the people from Azrael, I'll go talk to them. They won't touch you for now. Gaydar and Scylla sat there and chatted, but no one around them could hear what Gaydar and Scylla were saying. Even if there was a listening device next to them, it wouldn't be able to pick up any sound. An hour later, Scylla rode his hoverboard back to the Vanguard area in exhaustion. The moment he got back, he fell asleep. Gaydar's method used up too much spiritual power. Practicing alone took up more than half of it. But even though it was very taxing, Scylla could still afford it once he got used to it. No wonder those who could get the shard without being found out were all strong. Ordinary people with rank A genes would definitely not be able to afford such an amount of mental power consumption. Hey, Scylla, what's wrong? Huimao jumped onto Scylla from the cat's nest of fish biscuits. Get down already, you smell like fish. Huimao stomped on Scylla a few times like he was venting his anger before jumping back into his nest. As expected, sleeping in a nest of fish biscuits was the best. Scylla lay on his bed and looked at Huimao, who had crawled back into the fish biscuits. He began to think of a countermeasure. It was obvious that Huimao would be a good helper against Osculos, but whether or not he could be of any help was another question altogether. Just as Gaydar said, Azrael's men didn't come looking for Scylla, and the leaders' summit had begun. The summit ended after 5 whole days of meetings. No one except the participants knew exactly how many people had participated in the summit or what the process was like. However, the division of Sector Z had been made public. There was no telling if there were some internal rules, but Ji Feng's division just so happened to include the planet where they mined the special energy ores. All in all, Ji Feng's division was pretty good. Of course, there were people who were satisfied, and there were people who were dissatisfied. The military didn't care what would happen to those who were dissatisfied. It was a matter of personal luck, and they had to accept it even if they were dissatisfied. If you want to fight, then go ahead. As long as you don't break the bottom line. Scylla left the big planet with the crowd and returned to a small planet in the satellite belt. After packing up a bit, they departed for their assigned division. The A Squadron starships were at the vanguard, and the B Squadrons were at the rear. It was an impressive formation that was far more domineering than the 6th Division's solo operation. This was the true strength of the Big Four. At the same time, on an inconspicuous starship, Gaydar was talking to the person opposite him. Can that kid really succeed? The person sitting opposite Gaydar asked. Yes. Let's wait and see. Chapter 207. Inside the 6th B Squadron starship, Sillin stared at the string of characters displayed on the communicator in his hand. The characters were decoded to form a message, and it was from Hunting Blaygada. Gaydar was mainly trying to reassure Sillin that Azrael wouldn't come looking for Sillin just yet. Moreover, Osculos was being harassed by some military people as of late. He was a famous Star-class Lone Ranger in the League of Stars, and anyone who knew Osculos would keep a close eye on him. Therefore, Sillin was safe for the time being, and Sillin had a buffer period. Sillin had always been curious about hunting Knife Gaydar. A Lone Ranger like him was second only to Osculos, and although Gaydar claimed that he was injured by Osculos and was forced to recuperate in a prison at Sector S, Sillin thought that half of it was true and half false. Sillin believed that Osculos had injured him, but the fact that he was forced to recuperate at Sector S was a different story. The fact that Gaydar survived Osculos' attack proved how strong he was. But at the same time, Sillin also thought about something else. Osculos was able to injure Gaydar back then, but what about now? Gaydar gave Sillin a very strange feeling. Sillin couldn't understand the man at all. Moreover, considering Osculos' temper, why did he change his mind at the last minute when he had set his sights on Sillin? It was all because of Gaydar. Just how strong had Gaydar become after all these years? The fact that Gaydar was able to speak to Azrael alone was already an astounding level of influence. There was also his divination. Whether or not Gaydar was telling the truth, Gaydar was shrouded in a layer of fog. "Wow, we're here!" Carrie's shout pulled Sillin back to reality. Everyone was very excited when they saw the image on the big screen. According to the star map, this was the area the Vanguard was assigned to. Zone ZJ, Sector Z, District J. In the next 10 years, this area would belong to Vanguard for mining resources. Next, the team did a detailed analysis of the general situation of this area and listed out the situation of each planet to facilitate their subsequent actions. After 10 days of rough collection, the A-team confirmed a relatively large planet with a level A habitability. They named it Planet ZJ-100. Once ZJ-100 was confirmed, unless there was a special reason, this planet would always be the core planet of Sector J. Whether it was now or in the future, it would be returned to the military. After the central planet was confirmed, the 10B squadrons did not stop their exploration. With Planet ZJ-100 at the center of the division as the core, they spread out in 10 directions. The 10B squadrons would surround the central planet of ZJ-100, where the A squadrons were located, and occupy a planet as a temporary stronghold. Then, they would develop the planet on their own. Finding a suitable planet as a temporary stronghold for the B squadrons wasn't as easy as it sounded. It would be great if they could find a level A habitability planet, but if they couldn't, then they could only look for a level B habitability planet. However, level A habitability planets were extremely rare in Sector Z's universe to begin with, and the best one they could find was already a core planet. The communication network of Sector ZJ had already spread out. Coupled with the easing of the universe's environment, the communication between the B squadrons was pretty frequent. They all knew which B squadrons had found a suitable planet, and which B squadrons were still stuck at a standstill. As the exploration work continued, they kept hearing that some B squadrons had found a suitable planet. 2 of them were even lucky enough to find a level A habitability planet. Although the 2 planets weren't big, it was enough to make the other B squadrons envious. Recently, everyone in the 6th Division had begun to grow impatient. This was because the 6th Division had yet to confirm a temporary stronghold planet. They hadn't found a level A habitability planet, and they had only found 3 level B habitability planets. These 3 planets were small in size, and their environments alone were enough to remove them from the candidate list. They weren't suitable to build a temporary stronghold on. As for level C habitability planets, that was even less of a problem. Of course, there were more level C planets, but who would build a temporary stronghold on a level C habitability planet? If this was in the past, the squad members would have rushed over to inspect a level C habitability planet like they were on steroids. But now, they weren't in the mood to look at level C planets. The most important thing right now was to find a temporary stronghold. As for the other inspections and whatnot, they would only have the time and energy to do them after the temporary stronghold was built. Otherwise, they wouldn't even have a place to stay, and the squads who had already started building their stronghold were smiling at them. Who would have the mood to inspect a planet? On the main starship, Schotten and the technical crew were busy looking at the results sent back by the probes. The planets around them were either level C or level D. At the same time, these results would be shared with the squads after being processed by the technical crew so that everyone could understand the situation. Carey leaned against the back of his chair with a bitter expression as he looked at the results sent over by Schotten's main starship. He said dispiritedly, "Say, don't you think we're a little too unlucky? Otherwise, how could we have found those two underdeveloped level B planets by now?" Yudi glared at him and said, "It's already good enough that they're developing like that in this kind of environment." Carey snorted, "Are we really going to go back to those underdeveloped planets and build a stronghold in the end? No way, that's so embarrassing." Beaver looked at the summary of the information he had gathered over the past few days and said helplessly, "There's nothing we can do. Not every B squadron is so lucky." Carey turned his head and looked at the white fatty who was rolling around with a Miantuan at the corner of the wall. "Shuecho, come over here and give Big Brother a pinch. It'll help vent some of my anger." Shuecho heard Carey's words and immediately rolled out of the room. No matter how much Carey yelled at him, he pretended not to hear him. "Fuck, this white fatty is becoming more and more unlikable. Carey, it's not that Shuecho is unlikable. It's that your period is coming," Yudi said while stroking the Miantuan's tail that had jumped onto his knee. "You're the one who's on your period." Beaver heard the conversation between Carey and Yudi and shook his head. "Never mind, let them bicker all they want." He looked at the analysis data again and glanced at the scene outside on the big screen. They were about to pass by a C-grade planet. The surface area of the planet was not bad, but according to the data from the probes, it was not suitable for landing. How good could a planet with a C-grade habitability be? Many people thought the same as Beaver, so the 6th Division starship had no intention of stopping. However, as they got closer and closer to the C-grade planet, Huimao, who was sleeping on Silen's shoulder, suddenly opened his eyes and his ears perked up. "What's wrong?" Silen asked when he saw Huimao's reaction. "Something's wrong. That planet. Something's wrong." Huimao stared at the image displayed on the big screen. His gaze landed on the planet that had been identified as C-grade habitability. "What's wrong?" Huimao did not speak, but Silen saw Huimao's pupils dilate and contract into the shape of swords. Something that could interest Huimao so much, Silen immediately connected to Schotten's communicator. "Commander, please stop the starship for a moment. Something's come up." "What is it?" Schotten asked. Right now, Schotten was not in a good mood either. After all, the 6B squadron had not made any progress until now, and Schotten was the one who drew lots to decide the sailing direction and route of each B squadron. Now that they had not encountered any good planets along the way, the members were all starting to complain in their hearts. Therefore, the pressure on Schotten was considerable. "I've discovered something. I want to take a look at the planet that has been appraised as a rank C habitability planet," Celine told him her thoughts directly. Schotten frowned and fell silent for a moment. Then he said, "Sure. How much support do you need?" "No need. Wheeze, Cheto, and I are enough. I'll give you 3 hours. If you find nothing, come back immediately." "All right." Some of the technicians complained after Schotten ordered the starship to stop, but Schotten didn't say anything. Since they had chosen to trust Silen, they had to endure the pressure. Carey wanted to go with Silen, but Silen turned him down. Instead, he piloted a small space plane and flew over with Huimao and Cheto. The air on this planet was very thin, so the cosmic rays were very strong, and the air itself was harmful to human breathing. That was why Scylla walked out of the space plane wearing a protective suit. Huimao was the one who pointed out the landing spot. Huimao and Cheto were very comfortable. After walking out of the space plane, Huimao kept running in a certain direction. Cheto didn't notice anything unusual on the starship, but his eyes flashed after he stepped out of the space plane. It was obvious that he was doing a deep scan of the area. This place looked like a plain, but there were some small hills here and there. There weren't any tall mountains at all. Huimao looked very excited. It wasn't because he was excited about food, but because he had found something fun. Normal scanning devices were useless in this place, and Scylla's biomonitor didn't show anything at all. Not even their vitals showed anything. It was obvious that there was something wrong with this place. Fortunately, Cheto was still functioning normally. He was able to transmit some images to the starship through him. Although the images were a little disjointed, they were still visible enough for the people on the starship to see what was going on. Scylla's running footsteps came to a halt as he looked around. He could feel a lot of eyes watching them from the shadows. "There are high-level alien life forms nearby," Cheto said. "There are, but we don't know what they are." Scylla looked around once before continuing forward with Huimao. On the starship, Shotten and the technicians couldn't believe what Scylla and Cheto were saying. According to the data detected by the probes, there weren't any high-level life forms on this planet. There were microbes, but most of them lived in extreme environments. There were also some low-level, single-celled organisms, and plants were more like low-level life forms. Huimao clearly didn't care about the gazes. Instead, he lowered his head and sniffed here and there. He looked very happy. "There's something down here. It's an electronic device. It's huge." Huimao turned around and said to Scylla excitedly. "How big is it?" Scylla asked. "The place we landed, the places we passed, and the places we're stepping on right now extend all the way to the distance. It's about 1/5 of the planet's surface." Scylla narrowed his eyes. Although he had sensed something unusual after he arrived on this planet, his senses weren't as sensitive as Huimao's. He didn't know what it was, and he couldn't estimate the range of the sensation. Still, he was surprised to hear Huimao's words. Right now, he had a vague feeling that someone had come to this planet a long time ago, and they had made a huge commotion and left some things behind. Shotten had heard Huimao's words too. The news was shocking, but he didn't doubt Huimao's judgment. In other words, there was something on this planet that was interfering with the probes. If that was the case, the data they detected would be rendered useless. "Scylla, don't move yet. I'll send someone to..." Before Shotten could finish, a few black shadows appeared on the screen. Scylla stared at the figures walking out from behind the protruding hills and took out his gun. What is that?" A technician gulped and asked. Since it was nighttime on the other side, they couldn't see what exactly it was from the image Cheto sent back. They could only see a rough outline. It was about 2 meters tall, and it looked like a standing scorpion. In short, it was definitely not a human. "Send a squad to the rescue immediately." The hair on Shotten's back was standing on end. This planet was really strange. Right now, he was regretting sending Scylla out. The creatures gradually increased in number and surrounded Scylla's group. They formed an encirclement and gradually shrunk. With the help of the dim starlight, Scylla was able to see the appearance of these monsters clearly. Their mouths were triangular in shape, and they had several pairs of fangs. There were 3 pairs of pincers on their abdomens, and 3 pairs of feet with sharp claws were nailed to the ground. There was even a curled tail behind them. The surrounding temperature seemed to have dropped a lot since the appearance of these creatures. Huimao still didn't look at the creatures. Instead, he kept walking in circles, thinking about something. "Wheeze, there's an enemy. What do we do?" Scylla asked in a low voice. These creatures were definitely not easy to deal with, and there were so many of them. The space plane was still some distance away, and the situation was very bad for Scylla. Moreover, he was the only human here, so he was the target of everyone. Scylla was going crazy at Huimao's calmness. In response to Scylla's low roar, Huimao only flicked his ears and stopped spinning. Strings of green characters quickly flashed across his eyes. Scylla and Cheto stood back to back, ready to deal with the creatures that were approaching them step by step. Yeah, a sharp roar broke the silence. This was the sound of a monster walking at the very front. It should be their leader. After the sharp roar, the creatures finally sped up and charged towards Scylla. His shoulder cannon, wrist blade, and combination laser gun were all ready. But just as Scylla was about to fight, the monsters suddenly stopped in their tracks and let out a low growl with unknown meaning. Yeah, it was another roar, but from the tone, it was clearly different from the previous one. After the roar, the creatures that were already 7 or 8 meters away from Scylla's group slowly retreated, and the reinforcements Schotten had sent gradually appeared in the sky. Reinforcements? Don't come over yet. Don't open fire, Scylla said hurriedly. Just now, Huimao had sent him a message. The things underground were coming out. After receiving Scylla's order, the fighters and space planes that were flying above Scylla's group didn't land immediately. They were already here anyway, and they would open fire at the slightest movement. Lieutenant, what's going on? Before Carey could finish his sentence, he was stunned by the commotion below him. Everyone's reaction was about the same. Boom, boom, boom. The ground started shaking. The creatures swiftly left the area and vanished without a trace in no time at all. It was just like how they had arrived earlier. Scylla and Cheto didn't move. Huimao had told them that there was no danger here. As the ground shook, the rocks and dust on the surface of the protruding hills were shaken off. Then, they lit up at the same time. For a time, the darkness of the night was brightly illuminated. The people on the starship were also stunned by the scene. The light was especially eye-catching in the darkness after passing through the thin atmosphere. Even without Cheto's image, the people on the starship could see it clearly from space. What did this mean? It meant that someone had come here and built these facilities before. Judging from the current situation, these facilities had been here for quite some time already. Who on earth built these facilities? Was the person who built these facilities related to the planet where the army was stationed? The technicians on the starship couldn't help but feel excited when they thought of this. The ground didn't stop shaking even after the protruding hills had lit up. It wasn't until a quarter-spherical building rose up from where Huimao was standing. The building was about 15 meters tall. After it rose into the air, Huimao stared at it while green strings of characters flashed in his eyes. Cheto cut off the image transmission with the starship and began analyzing the rising building. Huimao was decoding it, and Cheto was learning how to do it. It was a rare opportunity to learn such knowledge from Cyborg. Scylla stared at the building. He knew that Huimao was talking to this, or rather, the giant machine underground. Although Scylla couldn't talk to it himself, he could see the machine language and the communication between Huimao and the building. He didn't understand it. He could only see a little bit. 2 minutes later, a quarter of the spherical building opened towards the fan-shaped section where Scylla and the others were. The next year, it was changed into a passageway. Let's go. It's just a few of us. The rest of you can wait outside. Entering without permission will only result in death. Huimao walked into the passageway with his tail raised. Scylla and Cheto followed behind Huimao. Huimao's words were obviously meant for the 6th Division. The people who were about to land and enter the passageway were dumbfounded. Commander, what do you think? A team member asked Schotten directly. Let's wait around and do as it says. Scylla will send us a message soon, Schotten said. All right, that's all we can do for now. Use this time to look around and find the monster's nests. The second group will arrive at the planet in a bit. After Schotten made some arrangements, he boarded the aircraft and went with the second group of people to the planet that had previously been identified as a C-class habitable planet. Things didn't seem to be as they had imagined. Chapter 208. Scylla and Cheto followed Huimao into the building. There was a lighting device inside. The area they passed through would automatically light up, and it would only be extinguished after Scylla and the others had completely passed through. It was obvious that the original owner of this place was a conservationist. It didn't take long for them to see an elevator. The doors opened on their own when they approached it, and Huimao walked in first. Scylla followed suit without hesitation. The doors of the elevator closed and began to descend. After Scylla and Cheto had entered the elevator, all the lights inside the building were turned off. The only illumination left was a small hill that protruded out of the building's exterior. Other than the noise caused by the 6 divisions, space planes, and fighter jets, there was only the faint rustling of the wind. Shotten and the others found this strange. If they hadn't seen those monsters before, they would have suspected that there weren't any high-level life forms here. They had searched so many places, but they couldn't find even the shadow of those monsters. It was as if they had evaporated into thin air. Did they burrow into the ground? A technician asked. It's very likely, but the detectors can't detect the situation below the ground. It doesn't match reality, no matter how hard they try, said another technician with a troubled expression while looking at the scan. We can't use these detectors, so we can only rely on our men to search for them. For the time being, Shotten did not let his squad members go down. After all, there were unknown dangers below, and the planet's environment was very harmful to the human body. It was very inconvenient for people wearing protective suits to move around, and if those monsters were to come out and attack them all at once, it would be terrible. Therefore, Shotten could not take this risk. He could only hope that Sillin could send a message over as soon as possible. Sillin and Huimao walked out of the elevator. There were several tunnels in front of them, and the elevator was located at the intersection of these tunnels. Huimao's goal was very clear. He didn't hesitate after exiting the elevator, and he didn't explain too much to Sillin. He simply walked in a certain direction without hesitation. Looking at the construction of these passageways, Sillin did not think that they were built by a super civilization. In fact, although these passageways were considered solid and reliable, in terms of technology, they were not as advanced as some bases in the League of Stars. Turning left and right, Sillin saw some individual rooms, meeting rooms, big dining halls, and even big auditoriums, but he didn't stop moving. Right now, Wheeze was running faster and faster, and it looked like it was in a better mood than before. It was even shouting as it ran. Sigma, I'm coming. Come out and welcome us. Sigma? Who's Sigma? Sillin looked to the front. There were no people or animals. Hubie Lou, nice to meet you. As an excited voice sounded, an opening suddenly opened in the wall in front of them, and a robot came out. If they saw this robot on the streets of the 10 trade sectors outside of Sector Z, they would definitely be laughed at for being an old antique, old, ugly, and outdated. However, the robot that appeared here made Serene feel special. Looking at its appearance alone, this robot looked a little retro. Unlike Cheto's humanoid appearance and smooth movements, this robot didn't even have legs. Its cylindrical torso was a hemispherical thing that could roll in any direction. Its head was also a hemisphere connected to its torso, and a blue bar of light swept around it. This blue bar was probably its eyes. What was so special about this robot called Sigma? It had a head and legs that looked like a tumbler. His tone, his movements, and the change in the blue bar when he spoke. Its tone was very natural, and it sounded exactly the same as a human's. When it said that it was happy to see Wheeze, the blue light on its blue bar turned into a wavy shape, and it probably meant something similar to a human smile. Moreover, the worst part was that the bastard was waving its hands up and down like a fledgling flapping its wings when it was running. Huimao was so happy that he was running circles around Sigma, and Sigma was running circles around it. Even Sillin was feeling a little dizzy. Say, why don't you two take a break? Sillin asked. Sigma looked up at Sillin and Cheto behind Sillin. Then, it let out a wah and waved its arms a couple of times around Cheto and Sillin. The aura of a kindred. Sigma was so happy that the blue bar on its face turned into a giant wave. The corner of Sillin's mouth twitched. This robot's personality was similar to a child's. It was obvious that Huimao had been communicating with this robot all this time. After circling around Sillin and Cheto a couple of times, Sigma stopped in front of Sillin. Its blue bar turned into a question mark. You're a human? But why do I sense the aura of a kindred? Sigma asked. Huimao jumped on a Sigma's hemispherical head and introduced Sillin and Cheto briefly. Sillin is a weirdo, but all you need to do is treat him as one of us. Don't worry too much about him. All right. Sigma classified Huimao, Sillin, and Cheto as one of their own. Then, he said to Sillin, The air composition and environment here have changed, so you can take off your protective suit now, Scylla. Cheto didn't object to Sigma's suggestion. He had already measured the temperature, air pressure, humidity, and composition of the air. It was perfectly in line with human standards, so there was no need for him to wear a protective suit. This change only started when Sigma classified Scylla as one of their own. The environment changed very quickly, and it only took a few seconds for it to change completely. Scylla took off his protective suit and sucked in a breath of air. The oxygen and carbon dioxide levels were pretty good. Come here, I'll show you around this base. Sigma waved at them and started walking. No, rolling forward. Scylla was very curious as to how it rolled. But when he saw that the exposed hemisphere representing its feet had turned into a tooth shape similar to that of the stairs when it climbed up a flight of stairs, and then climbed up step by step, he understood that the hemisphere representing its feet could change its state. Scylla heard Huimao mention that the underground base was huge, but unlike other bases, this one was well-equipped. It was almost like a perfect underground world, and there was even a large man-made lake. Have you always been here alone, Sigma? Scylla asked. Sigma's voice suddenly turned sad. Yeah, it's so boring. I have no choice but to enter hibernation. I won't wake up unless an outsider shows up. What about those non-humans outside? We saw them before we came. Oh, you mean Lovag and the others? They're the guardian beasts that guard this base. When there are no outsiders on the planet, they will enter a dormant state. Once an outsider invades, they will wake up and attack the outsiders. Lovag? Scylla was a little confused. He had never heard of the word before, nor did he know what it meant. Lovag means night. Master created them to protect this base like a knight. Which sector's language is it from? Scylla asked. It's not from here. It's from my homeland. Sigma's tone grew even sadder. You're not for the League of Stars. Are you a robot? Nope. Where's your master? He's not. Yes. Master was the one who brought me here. After Master and the others left, he asked me to stay here and guard this place, Sigma said in a sobbing tone. I was asked to stay by the little miss and the others. To tell you the truth, I really miss them. Master said that I can't leave the base to look for them unless the shortcut is open one day. A shortcut. Olilo's cage, the shortcut to new life. It was the same type of star map fragment Scylla possessed. As expected, Sigma's master was the one who left Olilo behind. Sigma was like a defenseless child. It answered everything Scylla asked, and this was mainly because of Wheeze. Then, it treated Scylla and the others as one of their own, and that was why it answered almost all of their questions. It didn't take long for Scylla to learn everything he needed. Scylla, Sigma said that we can use this base. Huimao jumped on his Scylla's shoulder. Really? Scylla looked at Sigma. Yes. Master said that you can use this base as long as I approve of you. I approve of you. From Sigma's tone, it sounded more like he was excited to find a playmate in the future. Aren't your master coming back? Nope. Even if he does, he won't use this base. This used to be Master's old base, but he moved it. According to Sigma, Sigma's master had relocated his base to the planet where the military was currently stationed. Do you want a base? Do you? Sigma's blue bars turned into two big circles and looked at Sigma expectantly. Of course, this abandoned base would save the 6th Division a lot of resources and energy. Moreover, according to Sigma, this base had always been in a state of stagnation. There's one problem. This planet's environment isn't good enough. We can't stay underground forever, can we? Scylla said with some regret. That's not a problem. Sigma circled around Scylla once before pointing a finger at him. Number one, this base was originally above ground, but I had to go into hibernation and let it sink underground. So, when your master built the base, it was on the ground, and then you sank the base? How did you manage such a big project? Because I was bored. I didn't have anything to do anyway, Sigma said. Scylla's words were full of vicissitudes. A robot left alone in an old base. What an inspirational story. Sigma's voice was filled with joy as he raised another finger and said, My second question. This planet has been modified over a long period of time, and its environment can be adjusted. One of the reasons why the base was built to cover such a large area is that it can affect the entire planet's environment and air composition. Sigma's voice was filled with joy. It can be changed? Scylla exclaimed in surprise. Of course. It can change the atmosphere, air composition, and air pressure within an hour. That's how it used to be. Before Master left, everyone could do whatever they wanted. The blue bars on Sigma's face floated upward, as if reminiscing. Scylla rubbed his chin and beckoned Sigma with a finger. What? What's your decision? Sigma immediately leaned toward him. After discussing a few things with Sigma, Scylla told Sigma to keep this shortcut a secret for the time being. Once everything was ready and their testimony was checked, Scylla finally allowed Sigma to start reorganizing the base. Outside the planet's surface, inside the space plane, Shotten stared at the planet's surface on the screen. It was desolate and devoid of life. There was water and low-level flora and fauna on the planet, but they didn't add much life to the planet, and there were only a few of them. It made the planet look lonely and pitiful. While Shotten was thinking about something, Scylla's communicator connected. What's the situation? Shotten asked. You'll know in a moment, Captain. For now, have everyone go to the sky and don't leave anyone near the ground. I'll show you what we got in 2 minutes. Scylla's tone was very certain. Although Shotten was puzzled, he temporarily suppressed his doubts and ordered everyone to go to the sky. Once everything was ready, everyone stared at the scene below. The people on the starship also stared unblinkingly at the image on the screen. The glowing hills on the planet's surface grew brighter and brighter. Then, the ground began to shake even more violently than before. Even the rocks and sand on the surface were pushed away. Then, the base that had been hidden underground for hundreds of years finally saw the light of day again. Everyone in the 6th Division stared blankly at the magnificent building that stretched as far as the eye could see. The base gradually grew taller and taller. The surrounding area was completely covered in sand, but above the sand, the high-rise building of the base looked like a leader guiding the underground parts of the base upward. An hour later, as the sand layer gradually dissipated, everyone finally saw the underground giant under the illumination of the hill-like light. It looked like an earth dragon bursting out of the ground. It was as solemn as a military fortress. See? Scylla. Shotten's voice sounded a little hoarse. He seemed to know what was going to happen next. His heart rate sped up subconsciously, and he couldn't find his composure just yet. Wait, Captain. We'll talk later. What else? Shotten and the others held their breaths. They stared at the situation on the ground. 1 minute, nothing. 5 minutes later, there was still nothing. 10 minutes, 20 minutes. Scylla, what's going on? There's no movement? Shotten finally couldn't help but ask. It was rare for the 6th Division captain to be so impatient. Before Scylla could answer, some of the technicians on the starship excitedly told Shotten, Captain, the planet's atmosphere has thickened. According to the monitoring data sent back by the detector, the planet's habitability is changing from C-class to B-class habitability. In other words, this giant could change the planet to B-class habitability. It could also change it to C-class habitability. It would have the ability to do so. Thump, 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 thump. Shotten could hear his own heartbeat and warm blood flowing through his veins. Finally, Scylla's voice came to Shotten. Captain, the transformation is complete. There's no need to wear the protective suit now. Following Scylla's voice, a flat landing field appeared in the base. It was practically a temporary port. Good. Shotten landed the space plane on the ground and stepped out of it. He didn't wear the protective suit. The base's purification had calmed down the sand and dust. Now, the proportion of the various elements in the air was the standard, and the temperature was only slightly colder. For hunters like Shotten and the others, this was nothing more than normal. Scylla was already waiting at one of the landing field's entrances. When he saw Shotten, he briefly explained the base to him and then introduced Sigma to him. After listening to Scylla's explanation, Shotten's first words were, Are you willing to join the 6th Division? What followed was a string of child abduction excuses that turned the blue light on Sigma's face into a dizzying circle. Sigma didn't know what decision to make, so it turned to Huimao. Hubeilu, are you a member of Vanguard Division 6? Of course. I'm still a core combatant. Huimao said while looking up from Scylla's shoulder. Core combatant my ass. Not far away, Carrie curled his lips. However, Carrie, and the others' reactions weren't within Sigma's consideration. It only accepted the opinions of its own people. Little did they know that Hui Mao was also abducted by Silin. Every member of the 6th Division went crazy when they saw the fortress that covered 1/5 of the entire planet. It was a blessing in disguise. The A Squadron allowed the B Squadrons to move freely, choose freely, and build their own temporary strongholds. This was also a test of the ability of the B Squadrons. Every once in a while, someone from A Squadron would visit the temporary strongholds of the B Squadrons for inspection. Shotten was already looking forward to the A Squad's arrival. He couldn't help but wonder how they would react when they saw this magnificent sight. Sigma was more than happy to see the 6th Division move in. But the first problem they had to solve was compatibility. Lovag was a guardian beast herd with a chip inside its body. So Sigma needed to modify the chip's information so that both sides could live in harmony with each other. Back when the base was still underground, the guardian beast's food came from a nutrient fluid stored in the underground base. Since the nutrient fluid was limited, the guardian beasts would go underground and hibernate whenever no one was around. But now, the 6th Division didn't mind sacrificing a lot of food just to get along with the guardian beasts. Since they decided to set up a temporary stronghold on this planet, the first thing they had to do was build a satellite defense network. That being said, it had nothing to do with Hui Mao. Right now, Hui Mao was very conflicted because he noticed that Silin, Cheto, and Sigma all started with the word she. Does that mean I'm being ostracized? No, I can't be too different. But do I really have to change it to Hubelu? That sounds so bad. Chapter 209. Right now, the 6th Division was so busy that they could barely breathe. However, everyone was so excited that they were willing to work as hard as they could. At first, they thought that they would have to build a temporary base on 2 underdeveloped B-rank habitable planets, and they were even prepared to be laughed at by the B squadrons ahead of them. But who would have thought that things would take such a huge turn? Thanks to this, Silin's influence in the 6th Division grew even greater. Many of the team members would mention that Shotten would be replaced by Silin as the commander of the 6th Division during private conversations. Silin was still very young, and Shotten was in the prime of his life. Judging from the current situation, Shotten couldn't be promoted to the A Squadron in the short term, so they only talked about it when they had nothing to do with each other. Silin had talked to Dias once about this rumor. No one knew what Silin and Dias talked about, and the two didn't behave strangely after the conversation, so no one paid it any attention. Sigma explained the situation of the base to the technical team one by one, and then left them to figure it out on their own. The childish bastard didn't have the patience to stay with the technicians all day. After a heated discussion about the base's defense network, they finally decided to build a 3-layer defense network. The first layer was the defense network built by the technical team. The second layer was the defense network built by Yudi, Beaver, and Silin. The third layer was the one-track defense network that existed to begin with. The last layer was the base's foundation, and it wouldn't be manipulated by anyone. Of course, this anyone didn't include Sigma. Yudi and Beaver had built a database based on the data Silin brought back from Sector S's prison. At the same time, they upgraded the defense network and developed a new defense network. However, the technical team didn't agree with Yudi and Beaver's new defense network. That was why the 3-layer defense network was created. Sigma didn't mind setting up 3 layers of defense, as long as they didn't destroy the base. Apart from that, they could do whatever they wanted. Recently, some of the members of the 6th Squad had been familiarizing themselves with the Lovag Guardian beasts. Although these genetically engineered beasts looked ferocious, their personalities were not what they appear to be. They only had one bottom line, and that was not to destroy the base. Therefore, these ferocious-looking Lovag Guardian beasts were actually loyal to the base. If outsiders attacked, these Guardian beasts would fight until they died. To the people of the 6th Division, this was undoubtedly good news. At the very least, the Lovag Guardian beasts would not betray them. From a certain point of view, these simple-minded creatures were very cute. Silin observed for a moment. After more than 20 days, the Lovag Guardian beasts were showing signs of reproducing. If their food supply was stable, the second batch of Lovag Guardian beasts would arrive soon. When the second generation of Lovag's guardian beasts arrived, Sigma would implant them with a chip similar to the one implanted in the first generation. They would work together to defend the base. Recently, Sigma had been very happy to have a large group of playmates, unlike the dormant Lovag guardian beasts in the past. As a result, Sigma, Shueishio, and the others could often be seen running around the base like crazy. What a child who's been holding back for so long. To everyone's surprise, however, Hui Mao had always been quiet and spacing out. Today, Silin, Yudi, and Beaver were conducting the final inspection of the second layer of defense network. Let's take a break. We're tired from all the work we've done. The last bit will only take 3 hours, and we'll still have time to eat dinner with everyone, Beaver said while wiping the sweat off his face. Then let's rest. I'm hungry too. Silin took out some food from his bag and told everyone to fill their stomachs. They hadn't made it in time for the inspection of the defense network. Say, Wheeze, why don't you go out and play with them? Yudi asked Hui Mao. He knew that the Miantuan was nowhere to be seen as of late because it was playing with Sigma, Shueishio, and the others. Wheeze has been spacing out a lot lately, Beaver said. The cat had been sitting next to them and watching them inspect the network for days. I'm meditating. Hui Mao was furious. Spacing out and meditating were two completely different concepts. While it was true that the cat spent most of its time spacing out, it was still meditating a lot of the time. Silin flicked Hui Mao's ears. Fine. What are you meditating about? Hui Mao's ears twitched, but he didn't say anything. Silin and the others didn't rush him either. 10 minutes later, Hui Mao finally couldn't hold it in any longer and said, I'm thinking if I should change my name. Isn't your name pretty good? You named it yourself, didn't you? Silin knew about the cat's narcissism. But Hui Mao raised a paw and bent the tip. Silin, Cheto, and Sigma all start with the word she, so I'm thinking if I should add a she in front of my name. There's no need, Silin said. Besides, my surname isn't she. That's right. Hui Mao's eyes suddenly lit up. It was true that Silin's surname wasn't she. Silin said that his surname was Yuan, so it didn't matter what came after it as long as it wasn't his surname. Hui Mao's thoughts were very simple, so it didn't take long to figure it out. It was at this moment Sigma and the others came over to invite Hui Mao to play. Shueishio was lying on Sigma's back. Tang Xiuqiu couldn't carry him like she used to because the white fatty was gaining weight at an insane rate. Although Tang Xiuqiu couldn't carry him, and the other members of the Six Squad didn't want to either, Sigma could. In fact, he didn't feel any pressure at all. The Miantuan was lying on top of Sigma's head and giggling happily. Hurry up, Wheeze. Carrie wants to duel us. Shueishio tilted his head to the side and said. Hui Mao happened to be in a good mood, so he asked excitedly, That kid wants to duel us? What kind of duel? Duel in the air. Sigma answered immediately. The long, wavy lines on his face showed just how excited he was right now. Duel in the air? Silin looked at them and asked, He's flying a fighter? Yeah. Carrie said he'll be flying a fighter. Oh, and maybe Yudo's too. Shueishio pulled at his ears and laughed. Then how are you going to fly up there? Beaver asked. I can fly by myself. Sigma's hemispherical body slowly changed shape and floated up into the air. It was very agile in this small space. If Sigma can fly, then what about you kids? Are you going to lie on it like you are now? Silin asked. Of course not. Shueishio raised his head. We have Lovag. Hui Mao's eyes flashed when he heard this. Silin thought, this cat is up to no good again. Are there no stakes? Hui Mao asked. Stakes? Sigma scratched its head and only put its hand down when it touched the Miantuan. Clearly, it didn't know what stakes meant. Hui Mao, Shueishio, and the Miantuan shared a look. They all knew what Sigma was thinking, and they all laughed sinisterly. All right, this time we're going to lose everything in that Carrie bastard's cabinet until there's nothing left of him. The gray cat shouted. Yeah, we're going to make sure he loses everything in his cabinet. Silin and the other two thought to themselves as they watched the guys leave. Lovag's guardian beast can fly? Yudi narrowed his eyes. I think so, according to them, Beaver said. No one knew about this. Should we go check it out? Silin looked at the rest of the work. We can't delay this. Are you sure you can come back in an hour? Beaver shook his head. Forget it. Let's finish the inspection first. The three immediately got to work. Although they were working faster, they didn't slack off. What was supposed to take 3 hours was now done in 1.5 hours. After packing up their tools, Sillin and the other two walked out of the base. There were quite a lot of people outside the base. They were all watching the battle, cheering and roaring from time to time. Of course, the cheers were for Hui Mao and the others. Many of them were making fun of Carrie. "Yudos, hurry up and come help us." Carrie was almost going crazy in his fighter. These guys are so hard to deal with. His observation window was filled with the thick layer of mud bombs thrown by Shueqiu and the others. It was easy to see how badly Carrie was getting beaten up. When Carrie's fighter was hit by a mud bomb, the people below it roared in unison. Carrie was so angry that smoke was rising from his forehead. In the end, he couldn't help but ask Yudos to come up and share the firepower. When Sillin and the others went out, Yudos happened to be flying his fighter. Carrie was caught in a pincer attack from 3 sides. 2 love ags were carrying Shueqiu and Hui Mao. The Miantuan was with Hui Mao, and Sigma was on the other side. Sigma was as excited as a child that had just been let out to play. Shueqiu and Hui Mao weren't easy to deal with, and the Miantuan would occasionally toss mud bombs at them. "Those love ags are pretty agile in the air," Yudi said. It was true that if we hadn't contacted Sigma and opened the underground base to them, the reinforcements they sent might not have been able to come out on top. No one knew that these guys could fly at the time, not to mention that they couldn't fly at all. There was an opening on each side of the love ag's back. Before this, Sillin didn't think that they were wings. After all, these guys looked too similar to terrestrial insects. But now it seemed that Sigma's master had thought things through. If Sillin's guess was right, these love ags could move freely in the water. They were the product of genetic engineering. In their natural state, there were very few creatures that could do everything in the air, on land, and in water. These love ags were very qualified to be guardians. Yudo's fighter took off some of Carrie's firepower, but Sigma was clearly more excited than Hui Mao. Just like Hui Mao, its mud bombs were incredibly accurate. Although the interval between each throw was short, and it didn't seem like it was aimed, it had actually done thousands of calculations and threw them according to the most likely trajectory. Sillin had been studying Sigma all this time. Although most of the robots in the League of Stars looked similar to humans on the outside, most of them were still mechanized on the inside. The Robert family had improved their robots a lot and made them more human-like and intelligent. Cheto, on the other hand, was closer to a human than the Robert family's robots. However, Cheto's thinking was only superior compared to the Robert family's robots. Compared to Sigma, Cheto's thinking was a little more human-like. A human's thinking wasn't perfect, and there were always so many flaws in a person's personality. Some were childish, and some were deep. Sigma was more like a child than a human. The only difference was that Sigma was wearing a robot's skin. Sigma would get nervous when it was in an emergency, but it would show its mood on its face when it encountered something fun. Cheto, on the other hand, was more like an adult who had experienced the world. A robot like Sigma was the most carefree choice for its creator, and very few people paid attention to a childish robot like Sigma. Sigma didn't have a liquid crystal nuclear brain or a central chip, but Sillin's research revealed that there was something similar to a human brain inside its brain. It was a discovery that shocked Sillin to no end. What kind of person was the creator of Sigma? To think that the creator actually treated Sigma like a human. The more Sillin learned about Sigma's way of thinking, the more interested he became in Sigma's birthplace. The technological civilization there wasn't necessarily much higher than the League of Stars', but each had their own strengths. At the very least, they were a little more unique than the League of Stars when it came to the creation of robots. When would this shortcut be completed? In the end, Carrie lost everything in his storage cabinet, and Yudos lost 1/3 of his stock. When the battle was over, Hui Mao and Shueqiu split the spoils, and the 2 love ags came over to join the fun. After all, they had a share in the victory, so they squealed happily after getting the food and crawled back into the underground cave. This incident caused Hui Mao and the love ags to volunteer themselves whenever there was an exciting duel, but no one in the 6th Division was stupid enough to compete with them again. After the temporary base was built, they had to send people to collect energy ores from planets with energy signatures they detected during the search for suitable planets. Energy reserves were essential for the survival of the base. Other than that, they also had to collect food and go hunting. The food grown in the base was just the beginning, and it wasn't enough to supply the daily needs of the entire 6th Division. Silin and the Lovag are going to search for energy ores and food, but Sigma couldn't leave. It had to stay at the base. The Lovags couldn't leave either. This was their base, and they wouldn't leave even if they died. The good news was that the base was covered by the network, so Huimao told Cheto to send the footage to Sigma. Sigma wasn't interested in energy ores, but it was interested in mining them. Therefore, while Silin and the others were mining the energy ores, Sigma was staring at the big screen in envy. Why wasn't it the mining machine that they were talking about? On the mining planet, Silin and the Lovags came across some nutritious plants that could be used as food. All they had to do was remove the poison sac from their bodies. Silin even demonstrated the process to Sigma, causing the Lovags to move their fingers as if they were touching the plants themselves. While Sigma was watching the footage intently, a squeak suddenly came from behind. It was a 10-centimeter tall, newborn Lovags. Adult Lovags didn't come into the base often, and they rarely came after the 6th Division arrived. But this newborn Lovags was different. Sigma had implanted a chip into it after it was born. Without the chip, the Lovags were considered idiots and retards. But after the chip was implanted, the Lovags were no different from children. They were curious about everything and often moved around Sigma. In its core consciousness, Sigma was the safest character. Little Lovags had poked its head out to look for Sigma's movements, but it noticed that Sigma hadn't gone out to play as of late. That was why it came over. Little Lovags jumped onto Sigma's arm. Although its pincers were small, they were very strong and attached to Sigma's arm. Meow. Little Lovags are here. Huimao and the others greeted Little Lovags. Yaya. Little Lovags were very happy to see them. They jumped on Sigma's arm to express their excitement. Silin didn't interrupt Huimao and the others' video chat with Sigma. He cleaned the plants in his hand and collected some seeds. At the same time, he collected the poisonous sacs inside the plants. These were very rare medicines. This planet was very strange. Its habitability was between C and B rank. Places with dense vegetation didn't require protective clothing, but places with sparse vegetation did. There were energy ores in places with sparse vegetation, and some people were mining them. Right now, Silin was in a place with dense vegetation. The reason why Silin thought this planet was strange wasn't because of its habitability. It was because there were no animals on this planet. There were a lot of highly evolved plants, but not a single animal. Not even a small insect could be seen. The evolution of the species on this planet was clearly different from other planets. Without animals, the competition between the plants was very fierce. They had evolved all kinds of methods. If a tree couldn't move, it would be strangled by the vines. The vines would pierce their thorns into the tree trunk to absorb nutrients. However, although the vines could climb up quickly, they moved horizontally very slowly. As long as the tree moved slightly, it would break free from the vines. If the vines were too tight and the tree moved too hard, the vines would break and the vines would wither. There was also a kind of fruit that looked like a pomegranate. When in danger, the top of the fruit would open and spit out the seeds inside one by one. When Silin came over, he was attacked by these fruits. At the same time, Silin also saw one of the vines that had extended towards the fruit being shot by the bullets the fruit spat out. This was a very strange place. Chapter 2:10. A lot of hallucinogenic gases and other toxic gases would be released in places where plants and animals intertwined, causing the animals in the plants to collapse. However, in this forest of plants, there weren't many of these high-risk toxic gases released. Instead, the toxins were stored inside the plants. The toxins were stored inside the plants, and when hostile species of plants encounter each other, they would release the toxins in their bodies, cutting through the epidermis of the plant and seeping in. Some toxins could even liquefy the hostile species and turn them into fertilizer for their own growth. Some of the arbor plants here were not completely stationary. Many of them could move. Although most of them could not move as fast as a tortoise, compared to the plants on other planets, the plants here were already very special. Many of the plants contained a variety of precious medicines. Medicines that were directly isolated from the plants contained a considerable amount of activity and were much more effective than those synthesized by machines. Moreover, some allergies and rejection reactions could be avoided. Therefore, in a league of stars, natural medicines that were isolated from plants were worth hundreds of times more than synthetic medicines. All of this came as a pleasant surprise to Tico and Riculab. From a few plants, they easily extracted hallucinogens and other neurotoxins that were of high purity and activity. Tico and Lycrabe had been busy ever since they arrived. They usually didn't rely on robots to process the materials, and they usually did it themselves. The medicinal ingredients that they collected were indeed worth the trip. These medicinal ingredients were all rare natural ingredients, and 2 of them could only be found by chance. In a league of stars, the price of these ingredients was comparable to a starship. There was also a type of evergreen shrub that grew in clusters. Its leaves and branches contained a chemical ingredient that was often used by hunters as an analgesic. It could be used to treat high fevers caused by infection. However, many synthetic drugs had high side effects. After the analgesic was administered, there would be a period of weakness. However, the side effects of this naturally extracted analgesic drug were minimal, and its biological activity was very good. This was the conclusion that Tico and Lycrabe came to based on their own experience. To them, this place was indeed a treasure trove. Tico and Lycrabe had already marked this planet, and in the next few years, it would probably become their herb garden. The white rabbit was nibbling on the leaves of some unknown plant with its 3-petaled mouth. Many animals had an innate intuition and could sense what they could eat and what they couldn't. Seeing Tico's expression, it was obvious that she believed in this white rabbit's ability. Hui Mao and the others gathered some nuts that could be stored for a long time and some fleshy fruits. I kept a video feed of Sigma while I was harvesting, so Sigma was able to see their every move, comment on them from time to time, and eavesdrop on them. Those animals obviously didn't care if there were any poisonous gases or plant secretions here. At least for now, these guys were still full of energy and were jumping around. Scarlet Wind grabbed a fruit and sniffed it before starting to eat it. Wow, what's that? Shuecho ran over and plucked a fruit from the tree. He took a bite and it tasted good. But soon, Shuecho's attention was attracted by another tree. It was an umbrella-shaped tree with drooping branches that looked like a bell jar. What attracted Shuecho's attention wasn't the tree's appearance, but the watermelon-sized oval balls hanging from its drooping branches. Shuecho walked over and sniffed, then opened his mouth and bit the top of the oval ball. A moment later, some juice flowed out, and Shuecho licked it. It was sweet and tasted good, better than fruit. So, Shuecho stuck his mouth to the top of the oval ball and started sucking on it. The full oval ball slowly deflated. "Hey, what are you sucking on?" Huimao asked. Shuecho snorted twice, but didn't answer. Instead, he switched to another oval ball and continued sucking on the juice. Huimao jumped onto a branch and copied Shuecho's action. He bit the top of the oval ball and licked the juice that flowed out. Then, the Miantuan and Chiefing joined in the fun. On the other side of the screen, Sigma was frustrated. It walked around the room and protested loudly. In the end, it announced, "Bring that tree back." "How?" After licking one, Huimao wiped his face with his paw. He completely agreed to bring the tree back, but he couldn't be bothered to care for it. "Bring some back. We must bring some back. I'll plant them in a small garden." Sigma clapped his hands excitedly. "Yeah." Little Loveag jumped on Sigma's arm in agreement. In the end, the little guys discussed among themselves and shouted, "Sillin, Sillin mourned for them." This was fate. Sillin walked over to take a look at the tree. The juice inside the oval fruit was very nutritious, and some of the plant oils were very rare nutrients for humans. But for some of the plants that grew in this area, there was something that would cause them to retreat at the mere mention of it. These oval-shaped spheres were equivalent to the plant's fluid sacs. The fluid sacs contain a lot of plant oils that carried a sweet fragrance. The smell of the plant oils was hated by many plants, and they would retreat the moment they smelled it. But Wheeze and the others liked it very much, and so did humans. After the inspection was over, Scyllin asked Cheto to take care of the plants. Scyllin wasn't counting on the gluttons to do it. Even if they destroyed the entire forest, they might not be able to dig out a whole plant, not to mention that most of the plants needed to be treated for nutrients. The plants with the oval fluid reservoir belong to the viviparous type of plant. In most plants, after a seed matured, it would usually leave the mother's body and spread out. After a period of dormancy, it would wait for a suitable temperature, humidity, and other conditions before it would germinate in the soil and gradually grow into a young plant. However, due to the complexity of the natural environment, plants had a diversity of characteristics that allowed them to better adapt to the environment and survive. Therefore, there were some angiosperms that developed like a mammal's fetus inside its mother's body. Instead of leaving its mother's body immediately after the seed matured, it would germinate inside the fruit and grow into a seedling before leaving its mother's body. That was why people called them viviparous plants. The plant's branches covered the ground like a cover, and there were many lanterns inside the cover. In fact, there were seedlings that had sprouted from the seed. Once the seed matured, it would germinate inside the fruit without leaving its mother's body. The hypocotyl would stretch out and protrude out of the fruit skin, forming many club-shaped seedlings. If one broke the membrane outside the lantern, they would see the seedlings that had yet to leave their mother's body. Therefore, Cheto didn't need to prune the mother's body or dig out the entire tree. All he needed to do was collect some lanterns. Other than this plant, there were a lot of other plants that Sigma wanted them to bring back and plant in his botanical garden. Scyllin agreed to all of Sigma's requests. After all, Sigma was the one who contributed the entire base to them. So, Scyllin naturally wouldn't turn down a small request that would benefit everyone. After Scyllin and Cheto were done processing the plants, he left the rest to Cheto. While collecting information, Cheto dug out the plants that Huimao and the others had chosen, treated them with nutrient solution, and sealed them with a special membrane. Tico and Lycrabe would mark the plants that needed to be transplanted, and Cheto would go and collect the best materials later. While Scyllin, Tico, and Lycrabe were processing some useful plants, Udos and Carrie had come over from the mining area. Seeing that Scyllin and the others weren't wearing protective suits, Carrie and Udos also took off their protective suits. Carrie sucked in a breath and sighed. "The air here isn't bad." Udos looked at the detector in his hand and said, "Yeah, the air here is a lot better than the other side." "Hey, Shuecho, eat less. You'll have diarrhea." Shuecho was eating like a ball right now. Even Udos was worried that he might be overweight. Hearing Udos shout, Sigma asked in puzzlement, "What's diarrhea?" "Ahem, it's when you can't control your bowel movements," Udos explained. Scyllin and Carrie turned their heads away and pretended that they didn't hear anything. Udos noticed that Huimao, Chifeng, and Shuecho were all looking at him, and he obviously felt a little embarrassed. He rubbed his nose and said, "Hey, you guys should hurry up. We'll be leaving once the energy ores are all mined. Judging from your speed, there's still a lot of places you haven't visited yet, right? It's rare for us to come out, so let's enjoy ourselves." These words undoubtedly resonated with Huimao and the others. Instead of worrying about why they couldn't control their bowel movements, they turned around and went to look for more exotic plants. Carrie went over to watch Tico and Lycrabe process medicinal plants. He learned a little himself. However, Udos only watched for a while before his attention was drawn to a beautiful plant. The plant wasn't tall. It was less than 2 meters tall, and there was a feather-like thing growing at the top. When the wind blew, it looked like a peacock spreading its tail. It was a beautiful sight, and it also carried a sweet fragrance. "It's so beautiful." Udos couldn't help but take out his recording device and record the scene. While Scyllin was dealing with the plant, the vines that had curled up because of his arrival suddenly grew excited. The vines stretched out with a whoosh and swiftly extended toward a certain direction, and that direction was exactly where Udos was standing. At the same time, the vines around Lycrabe and the others also began to become excited, and at the same time, they quickly extended towards Udos. "Udos, be careful." Scyllin quickly ran over and used his wrist blade to cut off the vines that extended towards him. When the vines behind him reached forward, he took out a bottle of spray and sprayed it on Yudo's arm. Carrie and Lycrabe also rushed over to help, cutting down the vines that extended from all directions. They didn't dare to use flames or ultra-low temperature freezing guns on their own. The surrounding environment was unstable, and the external image could easily change the environment here. The safest way was to use knives to cut down the vines. When Scylla put a protective mask on Yudo's was still a little confused. Why? He was going to go up and cut the vines, but now he was treated like an injured person by Scylla. He was not injured. Yudo's looked at his arm. There were many bloodstains on it, and the blood was still dripping down. Scylla sprayed him with a compound spray to cover the wound so that the blood would stop flowing. After wiping the blood, he threw the absorbent paper in his hand far away and pulled Yudo's away from the place. After running for 50 meters, Yudo's looked at the original place again. The vines had covered the place, and the place where the blood-stained absorbent paper fell was also the gathering point of the vines. Obviously, these vines were attracted to Yudo's blood. Don't get hurt. Once you bleed, it will cause a series of movements. After all, Carrie had experienced a lot of things. When he saw this scene, he could roughly infer the reason for the reaction of these plants and the various possible situations that might occur. Fortunately, Yudo's was the only one injured. If everyone was injured, everyone would have to deal with the vines all over the place, and there would be no time to stop the bleeding and clean up the blood on the wound. Looking at the fine saw teeth on the vines because of excitement, the situation might get worse. Yudo's panted. After putting on the protective mask, he gradually felt the pain in his arm. What happened? I didn't even notice that my arm was cut just now. Yudo's was very puzzled. Wasn't it just taking a photo? How could he be cut without feeling anything? And there was more than one wound. There was a lot of blood. Lycrabe released a floating measuring device. The measuring device circled around and came back with some data. The gas released by the plant contains a lot of nitrous oxide and a few other auxiliary gases that affect the nerves but will not cause fainting or death. After inhaling this gas mixture, the body will lose the sense of pain, but the body will still be awake. The addition of the auxiliary gas will not affect the body's movement, so Yudo's did not notice it at all, Lycrabe explained. Nitrous oxide inhibited the release of excitatory neurotransmitters and the conduction of nerve impulses in the central nervous system, so Yudo's did not feel anything when he was cut by the plant and bled. Yudo's took a deep breath. He was so bold because he saw that Scylla and the rest were not wearing protective suits, and nothing happened. It seemed that he still had to be cautious. As a hunter, Yudo's still had a lot to learn. Vigilance was not something that could be cultivated through words. Although he had experienced this incident, Yudo's was obviously not frightened. Instead, he was interested. He wore a protective mask and held a measuring device in his hand, looking for similar plants everywhere. Scylla did not care about him. This was also a kind of training, and it was good to accumulate more experience. Moving forward, there was a lake. There was some microscopic algae in the lake, but there were no fish or any other aquatic animals. There were only countless unknown names of plants, ranging from small to large. On the other side of the lake, there was a very tall tree. It was like a giant looking down at the creatures on the ground. Compared to it, Scylla was as small as an ant. Scylla walked over and looked around the giant tree. Finally, he came to the conclusion that this giant tree was at the top of the food chain in this area. However, there are not many of these giant trees. It was a strategy formed during the evolution of creatures to respond to the environment, and it was also the rule of nature. Scylla found a giant substance in this giant tree, and this giant substance made the tree grow bigger and bigger. After collecting some of the primitive substances, Scylla looked at the horizon. Night was coming. In the forest, the night was full of danger. There would be all kinds of wild beasts, but there were no wild beasts here. What would the night be like? Although the light receded and dusk came. At night, the most obvious thing was the row of trees not far away. The branches of those trees stretched outwards, and there was a big flower on each branch. The flower was about 20 centimeters in diameter, and it looked quite ordinary during the day. During the day, this kind of inconspicuous green flower would not attract too much attention in this colorful world. However, when night came, it would gradually emit a white light. The darker the night, the brighter the light. The plants that were attracted to the light would slowly move over, and the vines would also move over. The other branches on the tree would firmly capture these plants that were moved into the trap, cutting off the connection between them and the main body, and finally becoming fertilizer for the growth of the main body. This was the strategy of the plants, the survival technique. Because the composition of the air would change at night, Silin and the others wore protective clothing and masks to be safe. After the glowing plants were full, the light would be dimmed or directly extinguished to save their own energy. The night here was not long, but it was enough for some nocturnal plants to have a full meal. Most of the plants were asleep. During the day and night, the plants carried out photosynthesis, respiration, movement, and sleep. In the forest where there were no insects, there was only the fleeting sound of hunting that belonged to the plants. At night, Silin and the others saw the predation of the nocturnal plants and saw the changes in the composition of the air in this area. It was no wonder that there were no animals in this area. In such a gas environment, many animals could not survive. This was a world that belonged to the plants. When there were no outsiders, they were the rulers of this area. The residents fought openly and secretly in the way of plants, and they multiplied. In the morning, when a ray of light shone on the plant area, there was a muffled thumping sound. It was a tree as thick as 5 people. The tree was very tall, but of course, it could not be compared to the giant tree. There was a big bell-shaped flower at the top of this tree, and the sound came from the flower above. After coming into contact with the natural light, these bell-shaped flowers began to sway, and then let out a distant sound, announcing the end of the night and the beginning of the day. After the bell-shaped flowers rang, some of the flowers that closed at night gradually bloomed, and the sleeping plants gradually woke up. Perhaps they were also thinking about hunting the next target. Silin and the others looked at the light from the sky and continued to do what they had unfinished. A new day had begun. Chapter 211. By the time he received the notification that the mining operation was complete, Silin's side was almost done with his work. The transport car had transported the seeds Cheto had prepared and the raw materials Lycrabe and the others had chosen to the spaceplane. Hui Mao and the others were also eating until they were full. They were all very satisfied with their harvest. Let's go. We can come back if we need anything. Silin gathered everyone and returned to the mining site. After a quick inspection, everyone boarded the spaceplane and returned to the starship parked outside the planet. Then, they began their return journey. Every squad's operation time was different. When Silin and the others returned, there were still 3 squads mining energy and metal ores outside. How's the harvest? Shotten asked Silin while looking at a group of people unloading cargo not far away. Celine smiled. It was obvious that she was quite satisfied with the rewards of this voyage. Not bad. We didn't find any good metal ores, but the energy ores are passable. More importantly, we managed to transplant some of the more important plants to the planet. We'll be able to save a lot of raw materials, and the potency and quality of the medicine won't be too bad. The specific situation of that planet had already been submitted to the technical team. The technical team of the 6B Squadron would combine the information collected by the various squads and perfect the star map. Every once in a while, they would report to the relevant personnel of the A Squadron so that the star map of the Vanguard's area would be more detailed and convenient for their future operations. Silin and Shotten chatted for a bit before arriving at Sigma's little garden. In the past, Sigma had only planted a few low-grade native plants in this small garden. Although the area was quite large, there wasn't much substance to it. Sigma had only come up with the idea after watching some of the old media videos stored in the base. However, after putting it into practice, he discovered that there weren't many species to be planted. There were only large patches of weeds, unlike the colorful gardens in the videos. Sigma had no idea what to plant in this small garden. This time, however, Sigma's little garden was more than fulfilling. Previously, he had stored some of the fish eggs sealed in the starship's aquarium and given them to Sigma to keep in its little garden. Now that he had transplanted these trees, Sigma believed that it wouldn't be long before the little garden became a sight to behold. Right now, Wheeze and the others were spending almost all of their time in Sigma's little garden coming up with random ideas. They had very little experience in planting, so all they could do was spout nonsense. The good news was that Sigma had done some research in this area, and Cheto was there to help stabilize their morale. More than 90% of the transplanted trees had survived. There were still a few eggs in Sigma's garden. They were Lovag's eggs. The Lovag guardian beast had entered a breeding season, but Sigma was in charge of incubating its eggs. Right now, the little garden's environment was perfect for incubation, so there was no need for special equipment to control the temperature and humidity of the eggs. A few days later, 6 or 7 second-generation Lovags had hatched. The Lovags were omnivores. According to Sigma, they ate a wide variety of foods and were very resistant to hunger. The newborn Lovags, however, weren't as resistant to hunger. Since there wasn't any extra meat, they had no choice but to eat vegetables and feed them nutrient drinks to replenish the nutrients they needed to grow. The first generation of Lovag beasts had definitely eaten meat before, and most of them were probably humans. This was Silen's judgment. When he first came to this place and encountered the Lovag beasts, the Lovag beasts looked at him like they were looking at a familiar prey. These little fellows who had just been born not too long ago looked at people with very kind eyes. Perhaps the chip that replaced their brains had an executive program like that, but they had never killed or eaten meat before. He couldn't bring these little fellows along when he went out to mine, so Silen was wondering when he should catch some bugs for these little fellows to eat. Silen didn't go looking for the worm. Not long after he made up his mind, something happened on the planet before he could carry out his next operation. On this day, Shatan looked at the situation of the operations of the various squads in his hands. He wanted to make a summary because in a few days, the A Squadron would send someone over to check on the development of the B Squadrons and reward the best with resources. Shatan was engrossed in reading when he suddenly received an urgent notification from a team member. "Commander, there's a space plane flying toward us. We didn't get a reply to the warning we sent. All we got was a continuous distress signal. What should we do?" Normally, an unknown flying object would be warned first, and if the warning didn't work, they would shoot. However, the spaceplane kept sending distress signals, and no one responded to the 6th Division's communication link. "Are there any signs of life on it?" Shatan asked. "There are signs of life on it, but they're not obvious. They're almost completely still, so we can't get any other information." "No results from scanning the spaceplane?" "No. At least there are no parasites or viruses on the outside of the spaceplane," the team member replied. Shatan thought for a moment and asked, "How long until it arrives?" "About 5 minutes. Based on the spaceplane's flight trajectory, it will be outside the base's range when it reaches our planet. The coordinates are..." The team member reported some of the analyzed data to Shatan. "Pay close attention." Shatan's intention was to let the spaceplane land, but they had to be on guard. Whether the spaceplane was a threat or not, they had to treat it as a threat and not fight a battle unprepared. "Yes, Commander." After the report was done, the team member began to do the follow-up work. His voice sounded more excited, and it was obvious that he was looking forward to a target to vent his boredom during this period of time. After ending the communication with the team member, Shatan connected to another communicator. "Attention all squads. Attention all squads. An unidentified spaceplane is about to arrive on this planet." Shatan informed everyone in the base of the situation. Everyone knew what to do next. Some of the people who were sleeping got up, grabbed their weapons, and ran out excitedly to meet up with their team members. Silen was observing the growth of the trees in Sigma's little garden. Some of the trees had already begun to bear fruit. When he heard Shatan's notification, he put down the fruit in his hand and walked out. The blue bar on Sigma's face flashed, and it quickly understood the situation through the base's reconnaissance device. But today was different. It didn't need to do anything. The 6th Division would make their move, so Sigma was very curious about what they were going to do. He ordered the little Lovag on his arm to jump to the ground and left the little garden. Once everyone was gathered and assigned, there was no need for detailed instructions. This kind of cooperation had been done many times before. "All right, that's it. Let's move out. Pay attention to your defenses." As soon as Celine finished speaking, the group of people eagerly grabbed their weapons and armed themselves to the teeth and left. "What's wrong, Tico?" Celine asked when he saw Tico standing there with a frown on her face. "Something's wrong." Tico pointed at the rabbit nestled in her coat pocket with her chin. Right now, the rabbit's ears were drooping and its head was buried as if it was trying to hide from something. After checking the rabbit's status, Celine turned on the communicator. "Attention, everyone. Level 1 alert. Level 1 alert." The cheerful Carrie and the others immediately turned serious. Celine wouldn't casually say Level 1 alert. If he did, then it had to be a very dangerous target. After receiving Celine's message, Shotten asked Celine how he came up with the conclusion. Celine only said that it was a hunch. Although he didn't know why Celine said that, Shotten still ordered the squad to be on Level 1 alert. It was too late to destroy the spaceplane. Destroying it would affect the satellites orbiting the planet, and if it got too close, it could affect the planet's B-class livable environment. They could only go on Level 1 alert. Level 1 alert? Are you kidding me? Didn't you say it was a space plane the size of a fart? Is it that dangerous? Some of the team members complained. After all, Level 1 alert was not a joke. At this time, the space plane had already passed through the atmosphere and was falling somewhere not far from the base. The people on the ground were already waiting not far from the estimated landing point. In the air, there were people piloting the fighter jet. Although Yudo's hands were sweaty, his control was still stable. Level 1 alert. Boom! The space plane crashed into the ground, creating a deep crater. The space plane was also largely damaged. Some of the team members wanted to rush up to take a look, but they were stopped. If it wasn't for Level 1 alert, they would have definitely gone up to take a look. But now they couldn't. Creak! Creak! The sound of the hatch opening was heard. Through the images from the satellites in space and the monitors floating around the crater, everyone saw that there were 8 holes on the top of the spaceplane. It wasn't the hatch they had imagined. There was no logo on the spaceplane. There was no representative stamp or serial number, so they didn't know who was on the spaceplane. The spaceplane was still sending out a distress signal, but no one was in the mood to save anyone right now. As hunters, they had been through too much, and they wouldn't lower their guard just because someone was asking for help. Whoosh, 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 whoosh. 8 cylinders were ejected from the spaceplane and flew in different directions. Each cylinder could only hold 1 human. Half of the cylinders were transparent, and through the transparent wall, they could see that the spaceplane was filled with humans. There were men and women, young and old, but they all looked like ordinary people. They looked like ordinary humans. 8 more cylinders flew out before the first one even hit the ground. Round after round of cylinders were ejected. Some landed directly on the ground, while others opened their parachutes in the air. However, based on their speed of descent, it would take at least 2 minutes for them to reach the ground. They were the targets of the fighter jets. Lying on Sigma's back, Shueisha suddenly felt uneasy and angry. It was a familiar yet annoying feeling, and it couldn't help but feel the urge to rush up and start killing. Aside from Shueisha, Chiefing felt the same way. A threatening growl escaped from his throat. Noticing the 2 fellows' reactions, Celine signaled everyone with his eyes to be on high alert. The cylinder closest to Celine's group stood upright. Through the transparent wall, they could see a woman in her 20s inside. She wore a knee-length skirt, had fair skin, and had a nice figure. Her eyes were closed, and her long eyelashes made people want to caress them. One of the team members gulped. Holy shit, it really is a murder weapon. There were a few more cylinders like this one around them. There were at least 10 of them in front of each team, and there were even more farther away. Some of the cylinders were filled with cute children, just like the first time Celine met Tang Xiuqiu. They had pink cheeks, and they looked innocent even with their eyes closed. The uneasiness in Celine's heart grew stronger as he thought of something. The doors of the cylinders were obviously reinforced. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been damaged even if they fell to the ground. The moment the cabin door opened, Celine fired multiple shots, and the people inside the cabin were all shot in the forehead. The woman was one of them. Everyone was wondering why Celine acted so quickly. Wasn't he being too impulsive? However, the next moment, everyone felt their hair stand on end. Although the people who were shot by Silen's glabella were bleeding, the rate of blood loss wasn't as fast as a normal person who was shot. Only a tiny bit of blood flowed out of their wounds, and none of them had fallen to the ground. What the hell is going on? Before Carrie could finish, the people opened their eyes almost at the same time. Their eyes were blank and unfocused. Everyone felt a chill hit them in the face, and they started firing without hesitation. But while they were firing, the people inside the cylinders began to change. Their bodies began to grow taller and swell. Before the blood on their cracked skin could flow down, they were covered by new skin. The new skin was pale, and bloodless. The beautiful woman had become as hideous as a monster. The meridians all over her body wriggled rapidly, and her fair arms were mixed with more and more pale and blood. They quickly thickened, and her slender fingers became like the claws of an eagle. There were even lines on them. The splattered flesh and blood did not affect the people's mutation. Instead, it seemed to have stimulated the blood of these monsters. They let out terrifying roars and rushed towards Silen's group. Every step they took made Silen and the others tremble. Although these mutated monsters were huge, their movements were quite fast, and they could dodge the shots. This was still a planet on the ground. After the cylinders in the air opened up, the people who walked out of them also began to mutate during the landing process. Bat-like wings spread out on their backs, but they were not like the membranes of bats. Their wings were thicker, and every flap could quickly change the airflow, allowing them to fly in the air flexibly and avoid the attacks of the fighter jets. Udos controlled the fighter jet to attack one of the monsters. These monsters were very agile and had a high sense of danger, so it was difficult to lock onto them. Their long claws easily left deep marks on the fighter jet, so while attacking, they had to control their close contact with these monsters. One of the fighter jet's wing was wrapped by the long tongue of a monster. The saliva on a monster's tongue was highly corrosive, and it corroded the wing. If Udos had not cut off the long tongue in time, 1/3 of the fighter jet's wing would have been destroyed, and its flight would have been affected. If that had happened, they would have been in danger. The monster that had its tongue severed by Udos opened its mouth and screamed. The severed tongue was rapidly recovering, but when a monster swung its tongue, its saliva splattered onto a fighter that happened to be flying past, and 2 holes were corroded into the wing of the fighter. The situation in the air was more difficult, and the situation on the ground was not easy either. These biohumans had obviously undergone biochemical modification, and even if their heads were cut off, they would not die. This undoubtedly made the situation even more difficult for the team. This guy was simply a human-shaped weapon. This was definitely a premeditated incident. Silen took out something that looked like a bow. An energy stone the size of a child's fist was installed on it. He aimed at the monster at the front and pressed the button. Whoosh! An arc of light shot straight at the monster, cutting it vertically in half. The strange thing was the monster that was cut in half did not bleed much. The green blood mixed with the blood seemed to have solidified, sticking tightly to the piece of meat. What was even more shocking was that the monster that was cut in half began to change. The cut began to heal, and then grew, until it became a complete body. In other words, the person that was cut in half was like some kind of animal that grew into 2 independent bodies. It was useless. It was useless even if it was cut in half. What was going on? Carrie raised his cannon and tried to blast them to smithereens. But these monsters' super high foresight didn't give him a chance to aim at all. As soon as Carrie's cannon moved over, the monsters dodged out of the way. F***, damn it, this is too fast. Carrie could not help but curse after his first blast missed the monster. Vice Captain, what do we do now? Someone asked. They had already taken out their lightsabers. Of course, they were not afraid of a direct melee. However, after seeing the scene of 1 turning into 2, everyone was a little hesitant. If they were split into 5 pieces, would 1 turn to 5? No one could say for sure. Therefore, they were now in a predicament that they did not know what to do. Silen had not been in contact with these guys for long. He did not have the time to analyze why these guys had such insane abilities. Do I have to grind them into mud? As soon as Silen thought that, a long scream came from a base. The scream this time was much louder than the one Scylla had encountered. It was so piercing that it felt like his eardrums were going to burst. The people from the 6th Division were not the most angry when these modified humans barged into the base, but the Lovag guardian beasts. Their mission was to protect the base on this planet, and these new monsters had undoubtedly crossed the line. Yeah, there was another sharp whistle. The Lovag beasts rushed over one after another. There were some on the ground and in the air. Behind them, some of the younger Lovag beasts followed the adult Lovag beasts, waving their pincers excitedly. Chapter 2:12. Retreat. Everyone retreat. Scylla and the Queen retreated a certain distance away and left the battlefield to the charging Lovags. If they continued to stay here, they would definitely be accidentally injured by the excited Lovags. Scylla estimated the number of Lovags. The ratio of adult Lovags to the mutated humans was close to 2-1. About 2 Lovags were fighting against 1 mutated human. In terms of body size, the mutated humans were stronger than the Lovags. However, no one could say for sure since they had never seen the Lovags' true combat power. Scylla never knew why the Lovags had so many pincers, and all of them were huge. Most of the animals that Scylla had seen only had 1 pair of pincers. Therefore, when he first saw these fellows, he felt that it was strange, but he could not explain why. Now, Scylla finally knew why the Lovags had so many pincers. The charging Lovags did not bare their fangs and claws like the insect beasts that Scylla had seen before. Instead, when they got close to the mutated humans, they suddenly moved their 3 pairs of pincers. The joints on the pincers twisted in a strange way, forming a circular shield. Bang! The mutated humans were sent flying as if they had been hit by an armored vehicle. Outside the battlefield, Serene and the others were a little stunned when they saw this scene. Is this their battle strategy? Carrie gulped. If they were hit like that, they would probably fall apart. After sending the mutated humans flying, the Lovags did not stop. Instead, they continued to charge forward. They knew that their enemies would not be so weak. The mutated humans stood up after landing on the ground. Their twisted bodies wriggled and quickly recovered. They seemed to have been angered by the Lovags. They roared and charged at the Lovags, sharp bones growing out of their fingers. However, they were smarter this time. They did not charge forward directly. Instead, when they were about to hit the round shield made of pincers, they suddenly jumped up and attacked from above. Against the mutants' attack, the Lovaga beast's reaction was fast. Scylla saw one of the Lovags detach a pincer leg from its round shield and quickly clamped onto the mutant's arm. Then, it slammed the mutant's arm onto the ground. Pa-pa-pa! It was like slapping a fish. Carrie and the others were stunned again. Looking at the Lovag beast's actions, it seemed like it was a piece of cake for it to grab a mutant of this size and smash it into the ground. It was hard to tell that the Lovag beast was so strong. Just like ants, they looked like they didn't have much meat, but they could lift things that were 400 times their own weight and drag things that were 1,700 times their own weight. And this was just an ordinary ant. After being modified, the ant would be several times stronger. Scylla suspected that the Lovags had a gene that gave them a similar ability. Scylla and the others watched the battle unfold. The attack power of the Lovag beasts could not be underestimated. No matter how they looked at it, the Lovag beasts had the upper hand. Not to mention, they also had the advantage in numbers. If a Lovag beast's pincer leg was forcefully torn off by the mutant, it would quickly grow a new one. Similarly, if a mutant's hand was chopped off, it would quickly grow a new one. Monsters against monsters. They're indeed a perfect match. Carrie sighed. Hey, why don't we make a bet on how long these Lovag guardian beasts will take to deal with these mutants? Xiao Shang rested his gun on his shoulder and looked at Carrie. Sure. Carrie looked at the situation on the battlefield and raised 2 fingers. 20 minutes. I bet that they will be able to deal with these problems in 20 minutes. Xiao Shang shook his head and raised 3 fingers. 20 minutes is too short. These mutants' recovery ability is too strong. I think they will need at least 30 minutes. They definitely won't be able to deal with them in 20 minutes. Carrie looked at Scylla. Hey, Vice Captain, do you want to join in? Scylla did not immediately reply to Carrie. Instead, He turned around and took out the ultra-low-temperature cold beam freeze gun from a box. "What are you doing with that?" Carrie asked curiously. "Something's not right." Scylla pointed in a direction. There was a mutant that had just been chopped into 3 parts by the Lovag beast. The mutant was sliced into 3 parts: the top of the shoulder, the torso, and the bottom of the waist. However, the moment the Lovaga beast shifted its target, the muscles of the mutant that had been sliced into 3 parts immediately began to contract. A portion of the muscles rapidly dissolved and formed new cells. Some of the cells in the blood also quickly gathered on the cut surface, forming a special callus. Then, under the watchful eyes of Carrie and the others, the 3 parts formed 3 new independent bodies. Each of the independent bodies was exactly the same as the mutant that had been chopped into 2. This scene repeated itself. However, a few minutes ago, Scylla had chopped the mutant into 2, and this mutant had been chopped into 3 parts. This, Carrie and Xiaoshang retracted their previous thoughts. If each mutant that was chopped into several pieces could become independent clones, how were they supposed to fight this war? Did they really have to blast them into smithereens? Scylla picked up the freeze gun and selected a mutant. He fired a cold beam at it. The body of the mutant that was fighting against the Lovaga beast quickly froze. However, it did not turn into a block of ice like an ordinary human. These mutants could still move, but their movements were much slower. Every movement would shake off the ice that had formed on their bodies. The only thing that was frozen was their skin. The ice that fell off was their outer skin. When the outer skin fell off, the mutants' movements would return to their original state. Imagine how painful it would be for an ordinary person to have their skin peeled off inch by inch. However, these mutants did not seem to feel the pain at all. Their eyes were only filled with killing intent and numbness. Regardless of whether these mutants felt pain or not, this was not Scylla's goal. For the Lovag beast, it was their habit to first take down their enemies, kill them, and then turn around to eat them. The killed enemies would be eaten by the baby Lovag beasts. This time, they had planned to cut the invaders into pieces and feed the baby Lovag beast that had just been born. Who would have thought that the invaders that had been cut into pieces would come back to life? The Lovag beast's anger increased again. The mutant that was hit by the cold beam suddenly slowed down and was cut into 10 pieces by the furious Lovag beast. However, the same thing happened again. These pieces of meat started to change again. However, the time it took for them to become whole was longer than the time they were cut into 2 or 3 pieces. Scylla raised his freeze gun again and fired a few shots at the same mutant. The mutant that was hit by the cold beam had slowed down considerably. Before the mutant was hit by the cold beam, it was about to jump away from the Lovag beast's round shield. However, it was shot by Scylla before it could jump. Pack! The frozen mutant that was hit head-on was smashed into palm-sized chunks of flesh. Callie and the rest could not help but shiver when they saw this. The bloody pieces were stepped on by the mutants and Lovag beasts, and in the end, they were almost turned into meat paste. In this state, he probably won't. Before Carrie could finish his sentence, a few protrusions appeared on the meat paste. The protrusions grew bigger and bigger, and the guard's meat paste slowly disappeared. F***, what the hell are those things? Carrie cursed. Yudi looked at the time. It's been 10 minutes, and the number of mutants has increased by several times. The Lovag beasts are at a disadvantage now. Although the number of clones has increased, the strength of each new clone has decreased compared to their mother, Celine said. How could this happen? It's because of the cell's versatility. The cells in the mutants are always in a highly stimulated state. When a mutant is completely destroyed, the best cell will be selected from the isolated body to differentiate. The other cells will provide the cell with nutrients and energy. Therefore, the clones that are cut into less pieces will be stronger than the clones that are cut into more pieces. This is because these clones absorb more energy when they differentiate. Just as Scylla said, these mutants did not necessarily realize this flaw. Instead, they instinctively began to absorb the pieces of their own kind that were cut into pieces and assimilate them into themselves. Then what should we do? Carrie scratched his head in frustration. He had no idea where to start. Moreover, The mutants and the Love-Ag beasts were fighting each other, and it was getting more and more intense. The smaller Love-Ag beasts did not approach them on their own. They only moved around the periphery. Before the pieces of the mutants were fully formed, the smaller Love-Ag beasts would rush over and take a few bites. However, due to the gluttony of the smaller Love-Ag beasts, some of the pieces were completely devoured by the smaller Love-Ag beasts before they fully formed. This way, there were fewer clone mutants. When Snowball saw this scene from afar, it turned its head to glance at Sillin, Tang Chio, and the others. Seeing that none of them were paying attention to it, Snowball charged towards them with a whoosh and bit down on a mutated human that was still in the process of dividing at the periphery of the battlefield. Shuecho, hurry up and come back, Tang Chio said anxiously. No matter how strong Shuecho's adult form was, Shuecho was still a juvenile. His ability and temperament were not mature yet. If he was accidentally injured by the Love-Ag beasts or stabbed by the mutant's claws, it would be enough to make him suffer. Shuecho was just a glutton. When he saw the smaller Love-Ag beasts eating, he was just a little jealous. He still had some self-awareness and was a little afraid of death. After rushing over and taking a bite, he quickly ran back, chewing the meat in his mouth as he ran. Carrie and the others were speechless. Fatty, no matter what, you still have human meat in your mouth. It doesn't matter if he is a mutant or not. He is still a human. How dare you eat human meat in front of us? As soon as Shuecho returned, Tang Chio grabbed his ear. Tang Chio picked up the gun and started hitting Shuecho's fat butt. Diaz had said that disobedient children should be spanked. However, this white fatty did not seem to care about Tang Chio's beating. Moreover, he was not afraid of pain. With Tang Chio's strength, he could not even pull a hair off his body. Shuecho took the initiative to let Tang Chio hit his, but while chewing the meat in his mouth in satisfaction. What does it taste? Huimao asked with blinking eyes. It seemed that as long as Shuecho said good, he would also go and eat it. Oh, crunch! After chewing and swallowing the meat, Shuecho grinned and said, not bad. Wheeze immediately ran towards the direction of the carcass and started eating. Shuecho looked at Huimao's back and looked at Tang Chio pitifully. However, Tang Chio's hand that was grabbing his ear did not loosen at all. Acting pitiful was useless. Just as Shuecho looked at Tang Chio with a wronged expression, Sillin walked over. Shuecho was not afraid of Tang Chio, Carrie, or Shotten, but it was afraid of Sillin. It couldn't tell why. Usually, it could play with Sillin, but once it made a mistake, it didn't dare to face Sillin. So when Sillin walked over, Shuecho's body stiffened and its round head drooped down. Sillin squatted down and looked at Shuecho. Shuecho tilted its head to the side. Sillin raised his hand and turned Shuecho's head to face him. Shuecho's eyes tilted to the side, but it didn't want to meet Sillin's eyes. Shing! The wrist knife in Sillin's hand popped out. Hearing this sound, Shuecho shivered and raised its fat hand to hold its head. I was wrong. I shouldn't have been greedy. I didn't say that. Sillin grabbed Shuecho's face. Since he was with Mo Hung, he had developed this bad habit of grabbing other people's faces. Be good, lick it. Shuecho blinked, not understanding Sillin's meaning. Sillin waved the wrist knife in his hand and pointed at Shuecho's tongue. Lick the knife once, and it's best if you spray more saliva. Didn't I see you spitting saliva at the Miantuan last time? Just spray more saliva on the knife. The Miantuan, who was gloating on Yudi's shoulder, shook its tail and turned its head away, not daring to look at Yudi. How'd he find out about such a stupid thing? Being stared at by Sillin, Shuecho pitifully spat saliva at Sillin's knife. Every time he spat, he would tremble. Looking at Sillin's expression, if Sillin showed any signs of anger, he would be ready to roll away with his head in his hands. However, it seemed that Sillin really wasn't angry. So the fat man spat more and more energetically. The others didn't understand why Sillin was doing this, but when Yudi pointed at the mutated human that Shuecho had bitten, they gradually understood. The mutated human that Shuecho had bitten had yet to fully form, especially the place where Shuecho had bitten, there was still a bite mark. Even if half of these mutated humans were chopped off, they would quickly split into a new body. Why would there be a bite mark? And from the looks of it, there was no sign of it recovering. The reason why this split body remained this way was because of Shueqiao. Sillin had seen the mutated humans that Huimao had bitten. Although there were signs of suppression, it wasn't as obvious as Shueqiao's. Shueqiao didn't have a venom sac like snakes, which meant that the suppressor should be in Shueqiao's saliva. That was why Sillin did something that made Shueqiao spit at him. After his wrist knife was stained with Shueqiao's saliva, Sillin tidied up his equipment and rushed forward alone. With lightning speed, he slashed a mutated human that was fighting with the Lovaga beast in half. Then, he quickly retreated, not wanting to continue fighting. Everyone observed the mutant that Sillin had cut into two. Unlike the mutant that had been cut into two at the beginning of the battle, this mutant did not begin to divide and recover immediately. The two halves of the mutant trembled, and no callous cells formed at the incision. Instead, the greenish blood that seemed to have solidified and stuck tightly to the flesh gradually melted and flowed out. Carrie and the others' mouths turned into an O shape. They all turned their heads to look at Snowball, a group of shining eyes. Shueqiao shrunk into Tang Xiuqiu's arms again and again. Carrie turned around, grabbed his greatsword, and ran to Shueqiao. "Come, Shueqiao, spit it out for Big Brother." After Sillin confirmed the effectiveness of his attacks, he retreated and said to the spectating Sigma, "Tell the Lovags to share some of the mutants with us later. They'll be responsible for covering for us and eating. It's best if they can finish the food fast." Everyone knew that Sigma could communicate with the Lovaga beasts, not to mention that he was the one who implanted the chips into them. Therefore, Sigma was in charge of negotiating with the Lovaga beasts. After Sillin briefly explained the situation to Sigma, Sigma promised to complete the mission. "Are you ready?" Sillin asked Carrie and the others. "Yes. Lycrabe has already taken a sample of his saliva and brought it back for research. I'm sure we'll get the results soon." The weapons in the hands of Callie and the others were all stained with Shueqiao's saliva. In order to spit on their weapons, Shueqiao's mouth was dry and he had to drink a lot of water. "That's good." Celine made a hand gesture, signaling the start of the operation. After holding back for so long, Carrie and the others charged toward the battlefield. Sillin looked at the situation. As long as he could slow down the cloning speed of the mutants, the Lovaga beasts would devour them before they could complete their cloning. So, after solving this problem, Sillin decided to investigate another matter. The incident this time was obviously premeditated. Those mutants were specially developed humanoid weapons, and that space plane was flying towards the planet where the 6th B Squadron was stationed. However, Sillin needed to find out which side had sent the assassins over. The mastermind would definitely try to cover up and erase all traces, but Celine still had to look for it. If he was right, the space plane would no longer exist after all the mutants were killed, and it would be even more difficult to find any clues by then. Sillin approached the spacecraft and quickly weaved between the mutants and the Lovaga beasts. It was hard to see his figure. The holes on the spacecraft that popped out of the cylindrical cabin were already closed. There was no gap for him to enter. After Sillin circled the spacecraft, he called Huimao, who was happily chewing on the mutants, over. "What?" Huimao smirked and licked his paws in front of Sillin. "Try to open the cabin door. Be careful not to let the system inside detect any signs of intrusion." Huimao paced back and forth, then squatted down in a corner of the spacecraft. Strings of characters flashed in his eyes. Chapter 213. Not long after, Huimao raised its head and looked at Sillin. "Sillin, it's done." "Done?" Sillin looked at the aircraft. He didn't see any openings. "Its main hatch isn't at the side, but under its belly," Huimao said. Under its belly meant that it was at the bottom of the aircraft. However, wouldn't the main hatch of an aircraft of this shape usually be at the side? If it was at the bottom, it wouldn't be easy. Sillin looked at Huimao, and Huimao started to dig. For a cat, it was rare to be able to practice digging to this level. Therefore, Huimao had always been proud of its ability to dig. With Huimao's help, Sillin quickly entered the interior of the aircraft from the bottom. After entering, he could see the situation inside the aircraft at a glance. This aircraft was mostly used to store those cylindrical cabins. Once the cylindrical cabins were released, the inside was much emptier. He took out the detector to check. There was no special reaction. Everything was normal, but Celine felt uneasy. Thinking back to the rabbit, could it be that the rabbit was only here because of the mutated humans? It was a pity that the rabbit couldn't speak. The gray cat circled around the space plane curiously and twitched its nose. There's a familiar smell. What smell? Celine couldn't smell it out. If someone had stayed here before and hadn't cleaned the place properly, Celine would definitely be able to smell it out. In other words, the people who stayed here had been cleaned up when they left. At this time, he couldn't help but admire Huimao's senses that were more sensitive than a detector. Huimao walked around the cabin again and determined a general route. It raised its paw and pointed at the places where there was a slight residual smell. There are many kinds of smells, but there's one that's very familiar. It's probably in these few places. If the smell had been cleaned at the same time, then the places where there was a faint residual smell should be the places where the person stayed for a long time, or the places where some liquid from the person's body dripped. Ah, I remember now. Huimao shouted, "It's that. When we went to the level 1 prison, we smelled that stench. It was disgusting like a rat. I killed a few of them, but I didn't eat them. They were so smelly and disgusting. After I killed them, they were sticky like a puddle of water." Something like a mouse? Was it as sticky as a puddle of water after being slapped to death? Wait, see if it's this one. Celine took out a small bottle from the scroll. At that time, he had collected some samples, but he had never analyzed it in depth. He didn't even get close to it. As soon as the bottle was opened, Huimao yelled, "This is it. It's disgusting. Take it away." As expected, in that case, it was indeed not Azrael or someone from other forces, but Fog or Wuxia. That person. Celine remembered that he only brushed past that person at that time. He didn't do anything, but Celine could feel the haze in that person's heart. So, which side was that person from? Forget it for now. There was no time to think about that. Celine's uneasiness grew stronger. There must be something else in this aircraft. But Huimao didn't smell anything special. What could it be? Celine analyzed the places that Huimao had pointed out with the residual smell. Then, he walked through a few possible routes based on the results of the analysis, but he didn't find anything. There were still 3 possible paths left, and Celine was currently walking along one of them. This path would give him a certain amount of distance from where he had stopped. However, when Celine reached the intersection point of this distance, the intense feeling of unease grew even stronger. This is it. Celine didn't doubt his intuition. Wheeze. How many people have stayed in this area before? Celine pointed at the area and turned in a circle before asking the gray cat. Not many. Only one person stayed close, right there. Huimao walked over and raised his paw to pat the ground. That's it. You come over first, don't get too close. Celine walked over carefully and touched his finger to the cabin wall. Feeling the information transmitted from his finger, Celine finally knew the reason for the uneasiness. There was something mysterious about this cabin wall. There were weak radioactive elements inside, but this level of radioactivity wouldn't make the human body uncomfortable. Moreover, the cabin wall was made of anti-radiation material, so the detector couldn't detect the radioactivity inside at all. The radioactive materials placed here had obviously been carefully calculated. When the amount of radioactive materials decayed to a certain extent, a box inside the cabin would mutate. The contents of the box would flow out and fuse with the materials that had gone through the decaying process, forming a high-energy bomb. The power of this bomb could blow up a thick layer of skin on the ground in this area. If it exploded now, the people from the 6th Division and the Lovag beasts outside would be injured by the shockwave produced by the bomb. The few that could survive would be heavily injured. Celine looked at the approximate time of the high-energy bomb's formation. There were still 10 minutes left. Instead of contacting the base from here, Celine had only activated the communicator when he was outside. If he had activated the communicator directly from inside, Celine didn't know if there would be other mysteries that would cause this high-energy bomb to form in advance. After a brief explanation of the situation here, Shadon immediately drove a large aircraft over personally. Now that the situation of the mutants on the battlefield had been suppressed, it would be over in 30 minutes. Therefore, Schotten didn't need to supervise the battle. He drove the aircraft over and cooperated with Silin to transport the aircraft out of the planet. As the aircraft had sunk into the ground, it wasn't easy to pull it out. Therefore, a large area around it was dug up along with rocks and sand. The commotion here had obviously attracted everyone's attention. However, before the mutants were completely dealt with, they couldn't keep looking at the aircraft. Since Silin and Schotten had done this, it meant that there was something wrong with the aircraft, and they had no choice but to throw it out of the planet. Now, what the team members needed to do was to complete the mission of getting injured. The spaceplane Schotten was piloting extended two large pincers and clamped down on the foreign spaceplane, carefully transporting it out of the planet. After it flew out of the planet, it sped up and threw out a couple of thrusters to attach themselves to the large piece. The thrusters pushed the spaceplane far away, while Silin and Schotten piloted the spaceplane back. 10 minutes later, the flames of the explosion ignited. As they had been pushed out of the range of the explosion, the planet wasn't affected. Silin explained the situation to Schotten, but Schotten didn't know much about the mist and wuxia, so he couldn't tell which side did it. However, one thing was for sure. This planet was being watched. Whether it was the mist or wuxia, these two forces were extremely dangerous. The strength of the 6th Division alone wasn't enough to go against them. Therefore, Schotten reported the situation to the A-Team. Not long after, the A-Team would send someone over to check on the situation of the stronghold. They would solve the problem together. By the time Silin rushed out of the spaceplane, the situation on the battlefield was already very clear. Only a few mutants were still holding on, and they became the targets of the Lovags. The rest of the 6th B Squadron were watching the show from a distance. Unlike the previous Lovags, these Lovags didn't directly cut the mutants into pieces. Instead, they bit them and ate them. "What's going on?" Silin walked over and asked. Carey raised his chin and pointed at the Lovags who were looking at the last few mutants pitifully. He then turned to the last battlefield. "It seems that the more the mutants split, the more the Lovags don't like them. It was like a bowl of soup. After drinking a little, water would be added to the original spot, and water would be added again. After a few times, the soup would be diluted, and the taste would definitely not be good. In the end, the remaining mutants were eaten, and the Lovags would lick the cells that had not split in time. This time, they were indeed full. The Lovags had grown a lot, and the speed at which they ate them surprised everyone. After the Lovags returned to their nest, Schotten ordered his men to do a thorough cleaning of the area to kill any potential threats. Although the matter was resolved, the crisis it brought made Schotten feel uneasy. He only felt better when the A-Team arrived. Silin didn't know the people sent by the A-Team, but they were all veterans like Somba Leruo and the others. However, they didn't put on airs in front of Silin. They called Silin over to ask about the situation and didn't ask anything else. As for what the A-Team discussed with Schotten after Silin's departure, Silin didn't know. He wasn't in the mood to know either. Right now, he was busy researching something that might save his life in the near future. The A-Team had left a squad behind to guard the base. They valued this place a lot, so much so that they had sent technicians over to inspect it. They couldn't stop praising the place. In fact, Silin, Huimao, and Cheto knew that Sigma was the reason this base was as strong as it was today. Sigma had maintained, perfected, and improved the base over the years. They looked at some of the tree species planted outside the base. They were genetically modified species planted to improve the planet's environment, and now they had taken root and sprouted. Not far away, a group of little Lovags were running behind Shueqiao. They caught Huimao's ball every time he headed a ball over to them, and they were having a lot of fun. These Lovags weren't hostile towards the people of the 6th Division just because they had eaten meat. It was because of the chips inside their bodies that they were different from normal beasts. "What are you looking at, Silin?" Huimao jumped into the room through the window and climbed onto Silin's shoulder. Silin scratched Huimao's chin and said, "You guys look like you're having a lot of fun." Huimao raised his chin for Silin to scratch. Then, he said lazily, "A bunch of brats." Silin curled his lips. "Other than being older, you're about the same as them." How's it going? How's your work? Hui Mao asked while wagging his tail. Not bad, but let me ask you a question, Whis. With your abilities, what are your chances of winning against Bart and Sombalero? Hui Mao opened his eyes and thought for a moment. I don't know. To be honest, the gray cat was well aware of its weaknesses. It was confident that it could beat the duo in a head-on clash, but a battle wasn't just about brute force. Strategy was also a part of it, and Bart and Sombalero looked like old foxes who had been through hundreds of battles. The gray cat's brain might be powerful, but it didn't know how to come up with many schemes and schemes. It didn't even know how to panic, and if Sillin could see through it with a single glance, then there was no need to even mention those two foxes. You want to fight with them? We can work together. You use your brain, and I'll use my claws. I don't believe I can't beat them, Hui Mao said. Sillin shook his head. They're not my enemies, but I'm stronger than the two of them combined. Hui Mao's ears twitched. I know. You're talking about the people you met in the prison. They were very strong, and they were also very cunning. All right, are they really going to attack the base? Hui Mao didn't need to ask the people of the 6th Division. He could understand things through Sigma. The entire base was Sigma's eyes and ears. I think so. Don't be afraid. I've discussed it with Sigma, and they're planning to refurbish the base and install a few cannons on the perimeter. We have the materials now anyway, and Yudi even said that he'd like to help us install cannons yesterday. Seeing that Hui Mao was getting excited, Sillin didn't interrupt. He scratched Hui Mao's chin and looked into the distance. No one knew what he was thinking. 2 days later, there was another team mission. 2 rank C habitable planets were found to be rich in rare metal ores. The ores were just in time for the construction of new defense facilities. Sillin's team and Zarathosha's team went out to mine. Each team was responsible for monitoring the situation on one planet. Hui Mao didn't come with them because he was in the middle of his excitement. Sillin left Cheto at the base to supervise them. It was to prevent them from fooling around. On the starship, Sillin listened to Carrie, Beaver, and the others discuss the construction of the base's outer defense facilities. He sat in silence. Unease, still unease. Sillin was never a person who acted unprepared, but this time he still felt very uneasy. Tico walked over and stopped in front of Sillin. She looked at Sillin worriedly. What's wrong? Do you need something? Sillin asked. It's not me. I just wanted to ask Lieutenant Sillin what you need, or should I say, what do you expect to run into? Tico pulled a chair over and sat down. She took out the little rabbit from her pocket and passed it to Sillin. The rabbit's ears drooped, and its eyes looked at Sillin with obvious worry. Sillin had never seen this rabbit look like this before. There was even a hint of reluctance in its worried eyes. Sillin didn't know why he could see this kind of meaning in the rabbit's eyes, but he felt that it was because of its eyes. The rabbit's mouth couldn't speak, but its eyes could. It's been like this ever since we left the base. It always looks at you like this, but it doesn't look like this when it looks at anyone else. Tico stared straight into Sillin's eyes. What happened? Is there something you're not telling us? Sillin rubbed his hands on his face. I can't avoid it. I can't avoid it. When he saw the rabbit's eyes, he knew what he was going to encounter. Sillin didn't answer Tico's question. He closed his eyes and tapped his fingers on the back of the chair. 5 minutes later, Sillin opened his eyes and stood up. He patted the rabbit that was looking at him and said to Tico, It's okay. Tico didn't take Sillin's words seriously. She knew the rabbit in her hand too well. She knew what each look meant. So when she saw the rabbit staring at Sillin, she was so shocked that she dropped the knife in her hand. That look meant that Sillin was likely to die this time. Otherwise, the rabbit wouldn't be so reluctant and worried. Sillin went to look for Yudi. Diaz wasn't around, so he explained some of his plans to Yudi. After all, in the entire 6th Division, only Yudi had the most authority and was able to analyze problems calmly. When the time was right, it was best to be decisive. By now, their starship was quite far away from the base planet and was about to land on the metal-rich planet. However, Sillin didn't give the order to land. Instead, he ordered the weapons to be ready. The members of the control room were in position to check on the energy supply and defense system. Carrie opened his mouth, but was forced back by a look from Yudi. Right now, Carrie was depressed and confused. He felt like his heart was being scratched by Hui Mao's claws. but he couldn't ask. Ready? Scylla looked at Yudi. Yudi nodded. I'm ready. Good, begin. As soon as Scylla's voice fell, Yudi issued a series of orders. The starship that was originally flying towards the metal-rich planet suddenly turned around, activated its protective shield, and flew away. Carrie couldn't hold it in anymore and glared at Yudi. Right now, the protective shield was activated to the maximum. How many energy blocks had been wasted? Furthermore, they had used those special energy blocks. At this point, there wasn't even an explanation. Before Carrie, who was about to open his mouth to ask, could say anything, the starship suddenly shook. We've been attacked. Through the image on the screen, everyone could see that the starship behind them was gradually revealing its true appearance. There was actually a starship lying in ambush there. What was even more surprising was that the detectors and scanners on their starship didn't notice anything at all. The cannons on the starship behind them were all aimed at Scylla's starship. If it weren't for the protective shield, the starship would probably be half paralyzed by now. At the very least, it wouldn't be able to escape at such a speed. Who are they? Carrie asked. I want to know too. Scylla looked at the starship chasing after them and left the control room. Chapter 214. When he reached the door of the control room, Scylla turned around and said to the others, As the vice captain, I'm handing over the control of this starship and the command of this operation to Yudi. Although the hierarchy among the hunters was not as strict as the military, they still had to follow the rules at critical times. Otherwise, it would be a mess. Therefore, when the situation was serious, everyone would consciously follow the orders of the supreme commander. But now, when they heard Scylla say this, they were a little confused. Handing over control at the last minute? Why? Since Scylla had handed over the command to Yudi, they would have to follow Yudi's orders for the rest of the operation. It was obvious that the starship behind them was not to be trifled with. But Vice Captain, Carrie chased after him, ready to get to the bottom of it. But Scylla did not say anything. He pressed a button, and the door to the control room closed before Carrie could reach it. When Carrie opened the door again, Scylla had already taken the elevator to the spaceplane's parking lot. Scylla looked in the direction of the starship behind them. He could sense the person on that starship. They would meet sooner or later, but Scylla did not expect Osculos to come so soon. From the looks of it, the Fog or Whoosh's people must have cooperated with Osculos and attracted some of the military's attention. That was why Osculos was able to shake off the military and come to Scylla. After picking a small space plane and taking a few energy stones with him, Scylla quickly checked its weapons and equipment before flying out of the starship. Although the firepower of small spaceplane was not as fierce as that of a large spaceplane, it was more agile. Large spaceplanes required too much firepower and were not suitable for a single person to control. On the starship behind them, that kid went out. The person who spoke was the person Scylla and Hui Mao had talked about not long ago. It was the person who had brushed past Scylla in the passage of the prison. Beside him was the woman with the blue blade that Scylla had met before. Osculo chuckled as he leisurely sipped on his recliner. He finished his drink, stood up, and walked out of the room. Not long after, an aircraft left the starship and chased after Scylla. Inside the starship of the 6th Division, everyone in the control room saw Scylla fly away from the starship. Tico and Yudi looked worriedly at the flying craft that was getting further and further away from them and sighed. I say, what is Scylla thinking? Also, who are those people behind us? Carrie was almost going crazy. Now is not the time. Yudi turned to look at the main control panel in the control room. Do not slow down or land on a nearby planet. Raise the energy shield and activate the thrusters to the maximum. Return to the base at full speed. Scylla had told Yudi not to slow down or land on a nearby planet. It would be suicidal to stop and fight. That was why Yudi had ordered his team members to return at full speed. Otherwise, they would not be able to stop the people behind them. Carrie grabbed Yudi's collar and shouted, Can't you King tell us why? Is it fun to keep everyone in the dark? CK. Yudi looked at Carrie expressionlessly and pushed Carrie's hand away. I'm just completing the mission given to me by the vice captain and bringing everyone back to the base safely. What the CK are you talking about? Carrie angrily kicked the chair beside his feet. The chair hit the wall and shattered into pieces. Bang, bang, bang. The attacks from behind were still fierce. Although the starship had an energy shield to protect it, the impact of the energy shield still caused it to sway. F*CK. Who are they? Do we have to keep running back to the base like this? Carrie was not the only one who thought this way. Many others were thinking the same thing. It was too useless to return to the base in such a sorry state. The people of Vanguard were beaten to this state, and they did not even fight back. How shameful would it be if word got out? Seeing that everyone's emotions were gradually becoming unstable, there were signs that they wanted to fly out and fight or find a place to fight. Yudi finally relented. After all, it would be counterproductive to keep them in the dark too much. Mist or Wuxia, which one do you think you can fight? Yudi looked at Carrie and the others. As soon as Yudi said this, the control room fell silent. Mist or Wuxia, who could they fight? Not even one of them. It was not that they were afraid of death, but they were afraid that their death would not be worth it. Bravery did not mean that they would be sending themselves to death. Yudi glanced at everyone and turned back. Follow my orders just now. Return at full speed. This time, no one was angry. They consciously did their own things. Doing their own things was the greatest help to the team. Carrie took a few deep breaths and suppressed his emotions that were on the verge of bursting out. He asked, then Silin, he has his own plans. Yudi did not say anything else. He opened the star map and looked at it. From time to time, he would give instructions on the route of the starship. Looking at the other party's flight, it was obvious that they had done some analysis of the area. Yudi did not expect to be able to get rid of the people behind them. He only wanted to return to the base safely. Silin had said that the other party knew about the existence of the base. The biohuman incident last time was also caused by the other party. This time, even if their team did not come out, those people would still attack the base. When they sent the mutant aircraft, they did not use biochemical bombs or other long-lasting bombs. Instead, they only used ordinary high-energy bombs. It was for the sake of the base. When he answered Carrie's question, there was one thing that Yudi did not say. Star Hunter Osculos. A person of that level would be too much of a blow to the morale of the military. Just the Mist and Wuxia alone would put a lot of pressure on them. Adding Osculos to the mix, Yudi suspected that some people would be more passive. Therefore, even though Yudi could see that some people had questions about the aircraft, he only changed the topic. When Yudi first heard Silin's thoughts, he was shocked. No one knew why someone of Osculos's level would keep an eye on Silin. Silin piloted the aircraft and flew to a planet that he had already chosen. This planet was one of the 2 underdeveloped B-grade planets that the 6th Division had discovered when they were searching for a foothold. According to Silin's analysis of the planet's environment and species, he had the highest chance of survival on that planet. Silin had considered taking out Osculos's aircraft in space, but Osculos was a star hunter. Not only was he experienced, but he also had better materials and tools than Silin. Although Silin used the special energy ore that he had discovered before, which could increase the defense of his energy shield by several levels, Osculos's energy shield had to be undamaged. Once he left Vanguard's territory, Silin's chances of turning the tables would be even slimmer. Therefore, when he was simulating the route, Silin decisively chose that planet. As long as he could buy some time, Hui Mao and the others would come to his aid. By then, Silin's life would be spared. After all, Osculos was still alone in this place. As Silin calculated his next course of action, he dodged the attacks from Osculos's aircraft. That being said, the spaceplane's attack was nothing more than Osculos's amusement. He wasn't counting on it to destroy Silin's spaceplane, not to mention that he wasn't expecting it to. Although he did not plan to kill Silin in space this way, Osculos did not want Silin to run too far away. He did not have much patience. Osculos looked at Silin's aircraft and pressed a button on the side of his hand. A series of rivet-like objects flew out. There were 9 of them in total, and they were all aimed at Silin's aircraft. They were highly sensitive tracking devices. Silin managed to dodge 8 of them, but he was still hit by 1. The rivet-like object could absorb energy and attach it to the energy shield, speeding up the loss of energy. It seemed that Okuro could not wait any longer. After being chased by the military for so long, Osculos was not in a good mood. Scylla did some calculations as he stared at the energy display that was rapidly decreasing. Then, he piloted the space plane to avoid yet another round of energy absorption rivets. Finally, he saw the planet. Scylla was about to adjust the controls and land when there was a sudden boom. 2 more rivets were attached to the aircraft. At this rate of energy loss, there was no way Scylla could reach the desired landing spot. Han Shao landed the aircraft in a forest with great difficulty. He had no idea how many branches the aircraft had scraped off, but the tree branches shook the aircraft violently. Before the aircraft came to a complete stop, Scylla jumped out of the emergency hatch and ran into the forest. Osculos' aircraft landed on a high ground next to the forest. The hatch opened, and Osculos walked out of the aircraft. He was still in the same outfit that Scylla had first seen him in. Looking at the forest and the aircraft that had just stopped, Osculos jumped down. He was falling from a cliff that was more than 500 meters high, but he did not seem to be falling freely. Osculos looked in the direction of the forest and waved his hand. His footsteps changed. His speed did not change, but his direction changed. He followed Osculos' footsteps and landed in that direction. Serene, who was running, felt a wave of telekinesis that was rushing towards him at high speed. Scylla had only ever felt a wave of telekinesis like this from Gaydar. It was too fast. Scylla had already pushed his speed to the limit, but the people behind him were quickly closing the distance between them. No wonder Gaydar had said that escaping from Osculos would be difficult. Sensing the rapidly closing distance, Scylla pulled out his gun, but before he could turn the gun, the barrel was snapped in half. Scylla felt like he had been punched by a giant fist. He slammed into the stone wall behind him, and his whole body sunk into it. Before Serene could react, he was grabbed by the neck and dragged out of the stone wall. His feet left the ground. Osculos grabbed Scylla's neck and lifted him up. He looked at the bleeding head and body of Scylla and said slowly, "I'm sorry to have kept you alive for so long." Bang! Scylla was smashed again, but this time, he was not smashed into the stone wall. Instead, he was forced into the ground. Scylla's physical fitness was pretty good. Many A-rank combatants could not compare to Scylla's physical strength. However, even with such a strong body, Osculos had managed to shatter many of his bones with just one hit, and his muscles looked like they had been forcefully torn apart. Osculos was obviously very experienced. He knew which bones to break and which could incapacitate a person. Gaydar had also said that Osculos was a person who liked to torture and kill. Scylla listened to the sound of his bones being crushed, but the immense pain did not stop Scylla's train of thought. In fact, every time the chip was activated, the pain was no better than when his bones were crushed. When Osculos crushed someone's bones, he would make sure to preserve the nerves so that they could better transmit the sensation of pain. "You don't seem to mind this level of pain," Osculos said slowly. Osculo was very dissatisfied with the fact that Scylla did not scream or scream in pain. A thin knife, about the width of a finger, protruded from Osculos' wrist. "Actually, I really hate Gaydar. He wants to replace me, but he never does it himself. He likes to use other people to deal with me. What I don't understand is that with the style of that old faker, Zada, he would waste his energy on you this time and let me be pestered by the military for so long. Tell me, how am I going to repay this debt?" Osculo spoke like he was meeting an old friend, but he was swinging his knife at Scylla. Inside the 6th Division's base, Huimao and Sigma were arguing about a design, and Shuecho had joined in and pointed at them. Cheto didn't have the time to interrupt them at all. However, Huimao suddenly froze. Every hair on his body stood on end, and his eyes became as deep as a whirlpool in the ocean. Sigma, who was still explaining its reasons, suddenly stopped talking when it noticed Huimao's abnormality. Beside them, Shuecho and the Miantuan backed away in unison. They felt like something was wrong with Huimao right now. It was as if he was about to start a massacre at any moment. The instincts of animals were very sensitive. The small Lovaga beast that had been jumping around suddenly left the area and sought refuge with the big Lovaga beasts. It was at this moment Yudi's starship finally arrived at the base planet. Alarms blared all over the base, and everyone quickly entered combat mode. This time, however, the love eggs didn't come out. Instead, they hid inside their nests. The little love eggs trembled uncontrollably and squeezed themselves against the big love eggs, as if it gave them a sense of security. Since they were prepared beforehand, they moved quickly and efficiently. Shotten ordered his men to cover Yudi's landing and attack the starship at the same time. They absolutely couldn't let them land here. Fortunately, the starship didn't try to force its way in. It simply circled around the perimeter. When Yudi's group finally landed safely, Carrie immediately told Shotten about Silen's situation. "Captain, hurry up and send reinforcements to Silen. Otherwise, he'll be in trouble if he's alone." Carrie volunteered to join the rescue team. Shotten looked at Yudi. What did Silen mean? Yudi took a deep breath and tried to calm himself down. He meant that he should leave first, and then we'll send reinforcements. Shotten clearly thought deeper than Carrie. Who's chasing Silen? It's Osculos. Who's Osculos? Carrie was confused. However, Shotten and the other members of the A-team almost jumped up. What? Osculos? Are you sure? It's that guy? Shotten pointed above his head. Everyone knew who Shotten was referring to by that guy. Yudi nodded. That's what Silen said. Why would Osculos have his eyes on Silen? That shouldn't be the case. Osculos has always had high standards. Someone from the A-team mumbled. When Yudi heard this, he wanted to kick the person out of the team. "Captain, now's not the time to talk about this. Hurry up and form a rescue team. I'm afraid Silen will be in trouble if we don't," Yudi urged. "Hey, who is this Osculos you're talking about?" Carrie was still confused. Another member of the A-team explained. Osculos is the most unique and twisted lone hunter in the 6 stars of Hunt. If it was a lone hunter, then Carrie definitely knew about the oddities among the star hunters. However, the name Osculos did not appeal to Carrie. What? Carrie was taken aback for a moment before he grabbed Yudi and lifted him up. He roared, "Why the fuck didn't you tell me earlier? He's going to die." Carrie and Yudi both volunteered to join the rescue team. Although the people from the A-team looked at them with disdain, the two of them ignored them. The problem was that a few old guys were still trying to figure out the cause of the incident. Damn it, don't you think you deserve to be ignored just because you're from the A-team? You're just taking advantage of your seniority. If you have the time to figure out the cause of the incident, why don't you just go and save him? Xiao Shang and the others from the 6th Division also wanted to join the rescue team, but Shotten refused. Since they were going to face Osculos, the most suitable people to join the rescue team were the A-team. Even if the B-team went, they wouldn't be of much help. While Shotten was commanding the starships wandering outside the planet and setting up a rescue team, a large hole was broken open from the inside out of the base. At first, Shotten thought that the base was under attack, but when he saw Hui Mao in his metal form, he told his men to put away their guns and not fire at him. Hui Mao let out a loud roar after he jumped out of the hole, and the sound waves almost knocked out the people around him. Thankfully, the sound waves weren't directed at them. They would have died a long time ago if they were. Hui Mao's roar was directed at the starship that was circling around the planet. After the roar, all the surveillance screens on the starship turned garbled. When they finally recovered, Hui Mao let out another roar. This time, however, a beam of white light shot out of Mao's mouth and headed straight for the starship. The energy shield that was originally protecting the starship was pierced by this beam of white light, and a large hole appeared in it. However, it was clear that Hui Mao wasn't planning to waste time with them. A pilotless space plane flew out of the base on its own. A figure flashed by and landed next to the space plane in just a couple of jumps. No ordinary person possessed that kind of jumping ability. After Cheto entered the space plane, Hui Mao jumped into it as well. Chapter 215. Neither Cheto nor Hui Mao touched the control panel, but the space plane started on its own. Every button, and every command was being input in an orderly fashion. It was a result of Hui Mao's control. Just now, Hui Mao suddenly felt a great sense of oppression and panic. It had nothing to do with itself. The cause of this sudden emotion wasn't here. It knew that something had happened to Silen. Whis didn't like to think, but once it did, it would notice that Scylla had been behaving strangely during this period of time. When it recalled the conversation it had with Scylla not too long ago, Wheeze was very regretful right now. Why didn't it leave with Scylla? Why did it build this stupid cannon instead? Cheto sensed Hui Mao's abnormality and learned the reason why Hui Mao was behaving like this through the communication method unique to machines. That was why he decided to go with Hui Mao without hesitation. Although Hui Mao wanted to destroy the invading starship as much as he could, he was in a hurry to find Scylla. Never mind, I'll let these bastards go for now. Under the watchful eyes of the 6th Division and the invading starship, Hui Mao's space plane left the planet in no time at all. In fact, it didn't even bother to look at the invading starship. Something must have happened to Scylla. That cat and Scylla are connected, Diaz said worriedly. Then send some reinforcements right away. The remaining people on the starship should be enough to deal with it. Shotten turned around and went to make the necessary arrangements. On a planet with a B-grade habitability, Selene's situation was very bad, very bad. Osculos had thrown him to the ground twice, and his bones were about to fall apart. Several of his joints were crushed, and he couldn't even fight right now. There were several cuts on Scylla's arms near his arteries, and blood was pouring out of them. Scylla didn't say that he would give Osculos Arillo's star map fragment and ask him to spare his life. There was another reason Osculos wouldn't spare Scylla's life, not to mention that Scylla wasn't the kind of person Osculos was. Osculos had no intention of asking Scylla where Olillo's star map fragment was. As soon as Scylla died, the fragment would sense it, so Osculos was just enjoying the pleasure of torturing someone. Osculos was a madman. He had killed countless people, and most of them weren't because of hatred. Those people died very miserably. They were all tortured to death. Scylla had never understood why people like Osculos, such as the other 5-star hunters, the few in the military, or the political organizations in the Alliance didn't do anything about it. After all, a person like Osculos was too dangerous. He didn't care who you were from the military or the Big Four. Anyone who ran into him was doomed. No one could guarantee that something like this wouldn't happen to one of their own, let alone a ticking time bomb like him. That was why Scylla and Cheto had worked together to hack into some databases. They hacked into the databases of the military and the Big Four, as well as the core databases of other important organizations. Although they didn't get any direct information, Scylla came to a conclusion based on the bits and pieces of information they got. There were some violent organizations behind Osculos. Of course, to Osculo, those groups were just tools that he could do without. He was still a self-centered, maverick man. He had no friends, no allies, and only a bunch of violent people who weren't even loyal to him. Then, it was these violent groups that posed a huge hidden danger and threat to the entire Alliance. After all, there were far too many such violent groups in the Alliance, and peace wouldn't cover every part of GL. There were even more places like the war-torn planets at Sector V that existed in the Alliance. That being said, there were plenty of times when the military and politicians would negotiate with Osculos to keep these violent organizations in check. It was a balance. Just as Gadar had said, a star rank hunter wasn't just about personal strength. It was also about their influence. Every star rank hunter was incredibly influential, even Osculos, who was known as the most unique star rank hunter. Osculos licked his knife, but there wasn't any blood on it. The knife wasn't stained with blood, and the droplets of blood would drip down the blade on their own. I heard that you're the one who killed that little skeleton. Little skeleton? Scylla's pupils shrank abruptly. Skeleton King Carano. You remember now. Osculos moved his fingers, and a new wound appeared on Scylla's thigh. It was another wound that was bleeding. I was hoping that the little skeleton would make some noise, but you killed it before it could, Osculos said, as if you were talking about a pet he used to have. Scylla couldn't see any hatred or resentment in Osculos' eyes. There was only a tiny bit of regret. It was regret that Scylla killed Carano too early. It was regret like a pig that was thrown into a pot before it was fully fed. You want to cough, avenge him? Scylla coughed out a bit of blood and said, Avenge. Osculos flicked his knife carelessly, and the tip of the knife left a new bone-deep wound on Scylla's leg. Right now, Every time Osculos made a cut on Silen's leg, Silin would scream in pain. Osculos was very satisfied with the sound. Does he have the right? He's just a useless piece of trash. Back when Carreño wasn't Skeleton King yet, Poison Fong didn't exist in the world, and Carreño ran into Osculos when Poison Fong wasn't a violent organization in Sector V yet. However, Osculos was in a good mood at the time, and he noticed that Carreño's bloodline was a little special. Not only did he spare Carreño's life, he even strengthened Carreño's constitution and told Carreño that Osculos would punish Carreño if he couldn't take down that area in a year's time. After that, Osculos left the area. He wasn't the kind of person who would stay for any force or organization in the first place, so he went off to find his own fun. A year later, Poison Fong ruled over that area, united the violent organizations in the area, and killed all who refused to obey them. They became a new rising force. That was the birth of the Skeleton King, Carreño. At the time, Silin discovered traces of artificial carving on Carreño's body, but he never found a clue as to why. Osculos was the one who did it. Osculos thrust his blade into Silin's abdomen while saying this. Then he slowly pulled the blade out of Silin's body and stared at the blood dripping off the blade. The blade turned completely bloodless once more. Silin let out a loud cry and started convulsing all over his body. Right now, Silin's body was covered in dozens of cuts of various sizes, and the ground was covered in blood. Although the blood loss and wounds weren't enough to kill him, it was still excruciating. So he's going to be disemboweled soon, isn't he? Osculos seemed to think that this was fun, so he stabbed Qinlai a few more times. Poke, poke. But when Osculos stabbed Qinlai again, Silin's body twitched a little, and Osculos' blade hit Silin's navel. Whoosh! Suddenly, flying needles that looked like chick feathers suddenly shot out of Silin's navel and headed straight for Osculos. Osculos jumped back and swung his blade to block the needles. While Osculos was swinging his blade to block the needles, metal bands emerged from Silin's body and wrapped around Silin. Then, a tablet unfurled on Silin's back, lifted Silin, and flew away at high speed. Silin had spent a lot of extremely rare materials and a huge amount of brain power to create this device. The advantage of these two devices was that they could catch the enemy off guard. Otherwise, they would be completely useless if the enemy noticed and took precautions against them. Silin had been waiting for an opportunity all this time. Judging from information he received from Gada, Osculos would not only bleed a person, but also disemboweled them. He wouldn't kill them in one go. That was why Silin had set up the needle device on Qinlai's abdomen. With Osculos' abilities, Silin wouldn't be able to activate the device with his weak telekinesis, nor would he have the chance to activate it manually. Therefore, it would be best if Osculos activated the device himself. Silin's painful wails and spasms were just a ploy to numb Osculos. Plus, Silin was nothing in Osculos' eyes. Plus, Silin's joints were crushed by Osculos, and Silin was cut so many times. That was why Osculos was a bit careless at the time. When the knife went down, Silin pretended to be panicked and in pain, so that the tip of Osculos' blade could just touch the device's mechanism. The most important thing for a person was to know their own limits. Silin knew that he would be caught by Osculos. If he wanted to attack this star hunter, he had to get very close to him to have a real chance of injuring him. Given Osculos' way of doing things, he wouldn't let his guard down unless he was allowed to stab him. Moreover, Silin was sure that Osculos wouldn't stab Silin's vital organs. He wouldn't even hurt his internal organs. It would only make Silin bleed a little more. After all, Osculos' hobby was to torture people. The reason Silin endured the cuts was to lower Osculos' guard as much as possible. He ordered Osculos to slash him a few more times while calculating the best time to act. Every part of this series of actions had been carefully calculated by Silin, and he had rehearsed it many times in his mind. The metal plate quickly carried Silin away from Osculos. Osculos, who had blocked the flying needles, looked at the holes on the ground and the edges of his clothes that had been corroded by the flying needles. With a flick of his wrist, he swung the knife twice in the air, shaking off the corrosive smell. Then, with a wave of his hand, a hoverboard flew to Osculos' feet. Osculos hopped on the hoverboard and chased after Celine. While Celine was being carried away, he did not stay idle. Instead, he looked at the surrounding terrain and environment. When he saw a forest, his eyes lit up with joy. That place was not far from the place he had expected. Celine took something out of his ring and tossed it into the air. Then he put on his protective mask. When the thing flew into the air, there was a loud explosion. For a moment, 100,000 square kilometers of the sky was covered in smoke. It created a heavy smog that severely affected vision. Osculos, who was chasing after him, didn't expect Celine to do something like this. Although he had encountered some small fries who threw smoke bombs before, Celine's smoke bomb was a little too big, wasn't it? If one looked from outside the planet, the entire area would be covered in smoke. It was too big for Osculos to disperse in a short amount of time. Fortunately, Osculos stopped and used his mind to sense the situation around him. The kid had hidden his presence very well. Osculos couldn't sense Celine's exact location even after he was a certain distance away. He looked at the scanner. It was obviously affected by the smog. Even though he didn't know how the kid had created a smog weapon like this, he had to admit that the kid had some skill. Not only did he have so many traps, but he also had such a big trick up his sleeve. Osculos wasn't angry. Instead, he was excited. Interesting. He liked hunting like this. It was too boring to kill in one go. It was more fun with some twists and turns. After throwing out the smoke grenade, Celine threw out a few more small cans before it landed at the predicted spot. The jars broke open as soon as they hit the ground, and the contents melted into the ground. Be it the flying needles, the smoke bomb, or the small jars, they were all tools that Celine had researched to save his life based on the information he had gathered about Osculos' style. It turned out that these methods were indeed useful. However, he would have to pay a price. Some blood and broken bones were nothing compared to losing his life. The location that Celine had chosen was not a safe place. Instead, it was one of the most dangerous places on the planet. That was because there was a dangerous species in the forest, lizards. In this jungle area, there lived some big guys that were more than 5 meters long and weighed more than 200 kilograms. They were definitely at the top of the food chain here, and they were the largest poisonous animals of this generation. Even giant pythons had to take a detour when they saw them. Despite their small size, they were ferocious when they pounced on their prey. They could run very fast, too. These lizards had strong necks and sharp teeth, which allowed them to attack fiercely. Their skin was hard and rough, and there were many bumps on their bodies. There were spikes on their backs, dark brown scales, and huge, sharp teeth in their mouths. These violent, ugly, cold-blooded creatures would make anyone who saw them shudder. However, Celine was very excited when he saw them. Fortunately, they did not all run away today. There were quite a lot of lizards around the nest. When he saw the mountain behind the big guys, Celine knew that he had arrived at his destination. However, a giant lizard like this wasn't something Celine could rely on. It was nothing more than a common prey for Osculos, and he could come and go as he pleased, even if it was an entire lizard nest. Therefore, Celine would add something special to them. Celine used all his energy to heal one of his arms. Now it could hold a gun steadily. Celine took out a modified gun and controlled the direction of the metal plate. At the same time, the gun in his hand also fired multiple shots. The first shot hit the side of a lizard's mouth. The bullet exploded into pieces when it hit its thick skin. Some liquid flowed out of the broken bullet. The lizard growled angrily when it sensed that it had been attacked. Their cries were very hoarse and sounded very strange, giving people a creepy feeling. Celine's shot had missed. The wound on his arm still affected him, but he quickly adjusted. The second bullet went straight into the lizard's mouth as it screamed. When one lizard screamed angrily, the other lizards opened their mouths to scream as well. This was communication between them. Celine's next few shots went straight into the mouths of the screaming lizards. However, there were two that Celine could not find a chance to shoot at. The giant iguanas hissed as they chased after Celine. In reality, some of the giant iguanas did not need to crawl over. They only needed to stand guard, and Celine would go over. This was because Celine's target was the cave, the giant iguana's nest. At the entrance of the cave, there were 6 or 7 lizards lying there. They looked at Celine with cold and ferocious eyes, and their tongues flicked from time to time. Celine controlled the direction of the metal plate to avoid the lizard's big claws. If he was hit by those big claws, Celine would definitely die on the spot. A big claw grabbed over, and Celine controlled the metal plate to dodge. The big claw only grabbed the edge of the metal plate, leaving a mark. Celine had analyzed the attack power of these big guy's claws. They were quite powerful, which was also one of the reasons he chose these lizards. Feeling the stench from the lizard's mouth, Celine fired while controlling the metal plate to fly into the lizard's nest through the gap between the 2 lizards at the cave entrance. After entering, Celine immediately sprayed some potions on himself. These potions could conceal his scent, which was very similar to the surrounding lizards. At the same time, Celine pressed a button on the metal plate. Then, Celine, along with the metal plate, gradually disappeared. Of course, he wasn't actually vanishing. He was just turning invisible and distorting the air around him to confuse his vision. Moreover, he had lowered his body temperature to match his surroundings. This way, it didn't matter if the lizards were looking at him through heat or light reflection. They wouldn't be able to detect him easily. The wound had already been sealed with a liquid spray film, so the blood would not flow out again. Therefore, Celine, who had already treated the wound, stayed quietly inside the lizard's nest. He watched the giant lizard run inside angrily, then crawl out again. He breathed carefully through his mask. Sometimes, even the slightest abnormal breathing could alert these big guys. Pala! Pala! The sound of raindrops hitting the leaves could be heard outside. This sound was like the sound of nature to Celine. The rain of this generation had always been unpredictable and unpredictable. It came and went abruptly. But now, Celine looked at the falling rain outside, and the corner of her lips curled into a smile. Although he had calculated that it would rain every day in this area, he could not calculate the time of day. Timely rain,